Hello, this is a guy who likes fanfiction and is too lazy to read, so here is Rise of the Tau in audio form. Check the description for the links to the author. Part 141. A Diversity of the Species. He emptied the clip of his pistol as he charged and then slid the weapon into its holster, seconds before he reached the enemy. He felt the Dawnblade writhe in his grasp, the living weapon eager to taste the flesh of the Tau. Kodian flung himself through the air and brought the Crozius crashing down to carve through everything it touched. Bodies burst and came apart, unable to counter the power of the alien weapon. He landed and threw himself into a twist, swinging his arm wide. He returned with another powerful sweep, clearing more of the alien warriors from his presence. His other limbs became weapons also, for victims were easy to find and engage in this tight scrum. His fist shattered helmed skulls and his boots turned bones to dust with every blow. Death to our enemies. Crush them without mercy. He roared, the amplifiers in his helmet augmenting his strident voice. The words were textbook and autonomous, but it did not matter what he cried. Such acoustic assaults were intended to send the enemy reeling, and increase his menace. So far, it was working. He felt a strength coursing through him, power igniting his every nerve. A thirst for vengeance far greater than he had ever experienced sharpened his body and mind. It was as if he was somehow able to assess every move, to consider every action with an absolute clarity before he executed it. He pushed forward and struck out again, feeling the mystical weapon grow heavy in his grasp. He twisted sharply and an entire circle of Tau fell, blood mingling with the glittering arc his Crozius drew through the air. The butt of a rifle slammed into his back and he thrust an elbow behind him, feeling a chest cave in. Blue energy burst in his eyes, but he ignored it, not even feeling the expected kickback of the impact. Something caught his eye then, in the air above the surging tide of helmed heads. It was a fire warrior, his body broken and limp, twisting through the air. Another rose up sharply and spun away over the heads of the enemy force. It took him several seconds to realize that he was responsible. The Dawnblade seemed suddenly huge in his grasp, its size and mass greatly increased. He seized the studded haft in both hands and began to use it as a warhammer, smashing bodies to a pulp with every swing. Another massive thrust saw yet more Tau fall before him, and to his surprise he saw an opening before him. He had carved a path through the Tau lines, and aside from a few scattering warriors, all that lay beyond him was the body-strewn open space of no man's land, and beyond that, the Imperial defense line. That, and his prize. The armored commander met his gaze, the alien's face hidden beneath a thick helm. He slowed, taking a second to assess the threat of the individual. The Tau wore armor of a type he had not seen before. Its dimensions and appearance were similar to the stealth-generating armor he had encountered on the rock, but much more advanced. Different weapons systems were mounted to each arm, and a brace of unarmed drones accompanied the warrior. Kodian threw himself through the gap and charged towards his foe, hefting the Dawnblade up in readiness to strike. At that moment the commander saw him and raised his arm. Searing plasma erupted from the weapon and speared towards him, fast and deadly. He used the Crozius hammer to swat the blast aside, causing white-hot plasma to splash against his armor. He was almost upon his foe when the commander's entire outline flickered, then faded, and finally disappeared. Kodian reached the spot and swung again and again, anticipating the sensation of impact but experiencing none. Denied, he raised his arms and cast his gaze across the empty space surrounding him. Show yourself, coward. Face me with honor. It was then that he noticed the attention of the entire Tau lines upon him, and he realized he had allowed himself to be drawn into a trap. Pulse fire slammed into him, disciplined volley after disciplined volley smashing into his armor. His Rosariu's field flared again and again, pushed to the limits of its tolerance within moments. The defenders of the Imperial lines must have been stunned by the emergence of the chaplain, for it was only now that the barricades lit up once again. Las fire lanced into the Tau, felling almost the entire first wave. Kodian knew he had to act fast. His Rosarius and the ethereal influence of the Dawnblade were thus far successful in preserving him, but even he had no idea how long his fortune would last. He started forward, covered by the blazing fire of the entire defense lines. He caught the strident voice of an individual he assumed to be a commissar or some other type of officer, screaming orders to the beleaguered defenders. He had already found allies here. He was around 20 feet away when the first anomaly punched its way free from behind the veil of reality. A blinding tear opened up in the midst of the Tau, spewing ethereal light out into the scene. A lithe, almost skeletal figure hopped down onto the ground and the breach closed, the energies drawing back in on themselves until there was no trace left of its existence. The new arrival unleashed a terrible screech of malice and swept the long, bladed weapon in its hands out, punching the curved blade through the throat of the nearest fire warrior. Cries of alarm boiled through the Cotter as confusion threatened to consume them, and Kodian heard a word he recognized even as he identified the mysterious warrior. Kroot. Kroot. More and more of the alien creatures blinked into the fray, their weapons flashing as they carved into the Tau. Within moments the scene was one of panic and bedlam. Everywhere he looked, Kodian could see the unmistakable quills of the Kroot amongst the shifting fire warriors. Ugly, angular craft roared by overhead, spewing choking black contrails of thick smoke behind them. As they descended, winged shapes poured from the ships, descending like paratroopers towards the battle. The chaplain could not believe his eyes. He reached the Tau lines and cut a number of the enemy warriors down with almost languid strikes, unable to keep his attention off the amazing scene. The Tau were equally as stunned by the appearance of their former allies. The fight lasted no more than minutes after the arrival of the Kroot. The bloodlust of the murderous aliens was utterly unmatchable, and the Tau, for all their discipline and determination, could not counter them. The Kroot landers put down hard on the streets beyond, disgorging wave after wave of Kroot squads out into the fray. Those Tau seeking to flank the initial Kroot wave were caught by this advance and slaughtered, the keen marksmanship of the carnivorous aliens cutting them down without pause or mercy. Slavering Kroot hounds bounded into the fire warriors, tearing flesh and opening veins with beak and claw. Hunting rifles picked off those of a stronger mental discipline even as they moved to take up counter-defensive positions. Charged rounds burst bodies apart, killing instantly. Kodian dismissed the last lingering remains of his shock and forced his mind to focus. The Kroot were a force of sheer vengeance and determination, their powerful advance cutting through the Tau with the power and relentlessness of a Lascannon strike. The commander was nowhere to be seen. He sneered as he considered this, his mind conjuring up images of the being's cowardly retreat. He had no doubts that the Unity forces at large would know of the Kroot's presence and location within minutes. He turned towards the concluding battle and saw a number of individuals sprinting his way. He recognized Groker immediately amongst them and was surprised to find himself heartened by this, despite their brief association. "It pleases me to see you again, Chaplain," the alien said as he reached him. "It would seem that our arrival could not have been more fortuitous." Kodian bowed his head in greeting, even now still struggling to come to terms with the flawless high Gothic of his speech. "Your arrival could not have been timed better, Shaper." "How?" The tall alien did not wait for the rest of the chaplain's sentence. He raised his head and let out a grating bark. Seconds later an implosion of air rocked Kodian as another of the Kroot appeared by his side, lurid energies curling about him. The creature was unlike the others in appearance. Its skin was hard and scaled, like that of a reptile. And its body held much more mass. "You have my scouts to thank for that." Nkalg here absorbs the scent pheromones of a target and uses the currents of the warp to track them wherever they may be. "Your scent is amongst my people. Now, Kodian, you will never be lost to us." "How is that possible?" With all paths of evolution, the flesh is the key. Groker did not finish. He and his warriors burst into action, breaking around Kodian as they sprinted away. He heard shouts of alarm rise up across the Imperial lines, followed by the familiar whine of Lasfire. No. Without conscious thought he was off and running towards the defense lines, watching as massed Lines of bright fire speared by overhead. Cease fire! Cease fire now! He roared, magnifying his voice the best he could. The Kroot are our allies. The fusillade did not falter, nor had he expected it to. He was almost at the barricade now and he caught sight of several Kroot along the makeshift defenses, engaged in furious combat with the soldiers and Arbits there. The Kroot were not attacking through malice or hatred, but were fighting for their lives against a foe that did not realize their intent. He was the only one who stood a chance at saving the Imperials from themselves. He soon reached the defenses, his trained eye searching for the best point of access to the Imperials. He spied the burnt-out wreck of what appeared to be a PDF Leman Russ, and he quickly altered his direction. A single bound saw him standing on the hull of the tank, but he did not slow, using the Dawnblade to smash his way through the scaffolding and flak board before him. In moments he had created a gap large enough to accommodate his bulk, and he hauled himself through and up onto his feet. Several PDF troopers cast around as the chaplain rose beside them, their faces sagging with shock and fright. "Stand down!" Codian commanded, thrusting the head of his weapon out at them. "Lower your weapons or you will all die here today." The troopers cast their lasguns aside and flung themselves down onto the streets below, terrified by the towering Marine's presence. In their absence he saw the strident and unafraid Commissar he had heard earlier. The man strode towards him, his power sword and bolt pistol raised in challenge. "Traitors! Zeno's collaborators! Repel them from these defenses or suffer dishonorable death at the hands of enemy. Stand fast, damn you all! We are not the enemy, Commissar. We fight against the unity." A bolt round hammered into his chest with enough force to drive him back, the protective energies of his rosary ooze flaring before him. Lies. This traitor would see hallowed Terra fall beneath the yoke of the alien. Fight to the death. Fight for the honor of your emperor. Several more impacts rang upon the armor at his back, and he cast around to see a number of Arbits advancing upon him, their shotguns blazing. 3 mighty strides carried him before the armored men, and he swept the extended haft of the Dawnblade low before him to sweep the soldiers off their feet. He shoved 2 of them off the barricade with a sweep of his boot and hauled the third one aloft by his neck, ignoring the man's protests. "I am not your enemy," he said, with a deliberate slowness. "But do not test me, Rabbit." With that he cast the man aside and turned to face the Commissar once more, letting the Dawnblade fall at his feet. The officer was upon him now, only feet away. Another bolt round hammered into his armor, but he ignored it, his determination to see this conflict ended too great. "Damned conspirator!" the Commissar raged, lunging for him with his glowing blade. Codian easily avoided the blow and snatched at the man's sword arm, enveloping the limb with his vice-like fingers. The Commissar let out a cry of pain and dropped the sword. Codian grabbed his other arm and flicked it into the barricade, causing him to release the bolt pistol. With that he dropped the officer back onto his feet and pressed his arms down by his sides, his grip such that the Commissar was fast, unable to move even an inch. "Listen to me, and heed every single word. I have come to save you. These aliens fight for us. They hate the unity as we do, and they will die to see the Tau repelled from this world. Fight them and all. You will achieve his death." "They are Zenos," the Commissar gasped, his face red with exertion and anger. "Yes, and soon you will come to realize just how pointless such distinctions are. Your faith is great and does you credit, but do not allow it to blind you and consume your capacity for reason. It is not your place to question the wisdom of the Emperor's plans, but to strive to see them realized. Use that faith to see past the surface of events and recognize his hand in them. We need every loyal servant to fight this war, Commissar. You were born for this, as was I. Codian released the officer then and stepped back, allowing him to make the choice. A mixture of emotions passed over the Commissar's face as he retrieved his weapons and then looked out across the barricade where his men and women fought against the Kroot still. "Cease fire! Stand down, all of you! Stand down!" The scattered conflict slowly abated, much to the chaplain's relief. Human and Kroot lowered their weapons and separated, glad of the conclusion of hostilities but still wary of each other's presence. Good. Kodian said, confirming his contentment with a slow nod. That you have reason as well as faith does you credit. What is your name? Santarius. I am Kodian, Commissar Santarius, and I have come to do the Emperor's work. Santarius tipped his head in greeting and then shifted to look out upon the fatigued soldiers under his command. These are my troops, chaplain, and they are good men and women, despite their dwindling numbers. If you had not arrived when you did, then this line would have fallen within the hour. Perhaps sooner. Every approach to the palace is the same, defended by forces comprising of guard, PDF, Urbits and civilian militia. He sighed then, his features tightening. There are thousands of us scattered throughout the city, but we cannot hope to stem the enemy tide. It is our duty to weaken the advance upon the city, and it is a duty of sacrifice. Every blockade will fall in time, this much is inevitable. You have extended our existence, but our fate is sealed. Nonetheless, I thank you for giving us this opportunity to face the enemy a while longer. Kodian looked out beyond the barricades into the depths of the city. From here, towering over the tallest of the structures, the walls of the palace could just be seen. I have been tasked with an important mission, Santarius, one that could see victory for the Imperium in this war. I have a message that I need to deliver to the commanders of the Alliance, and I fear that if I am too late that a great mistake will be made, one that will see the unity victorious. The Commissar's expression took on a new intensity as he heard this. What would you have us do, start? As I have said, we are few. Lead us to the palace. The Kroot will carve a bloody path through the enemy to get us there, but we need to get as close as we can whilst at the same time keeping ourselves to the shadows, for we cannot risk another incident like this. Then we have an alliance. The Commissar replied. Plus. Barolinus frowned as he watched the Primarch pace by him. Thunder was written across Guilliman's granite face, and it took all his courage to ask the question in his mind. My Primarch, something troubles you. Moments ago, Guilliman had received word from Unva. Whatever the message had been had clearly soured the Primarch's mood even further. The Kroot have returned. He snarled in answer, pacing by the Ultramarine once again. Unva is greatly displeased by this. We will destroy them, my Primarch, I am sure of it. These Kroot are but another obstacle for the unity to sweep from their path. They cannot surely pose a threat to us. Guilliman paused as he heard this. He cast around slowly to face the Astarte, his dark eyes radiating contempt. Your mindless answer seeks to test my resolve in appointing you my ward. The threat that the Kroot represent is not a physical one. We annihilated them, Barolinus. We wiped them from existence. Now we see their ships orbiting this world and we receive reports of Kroot warriors engaging the ground forces. The Primarch's black eyes shone with anger as he shook his fists at the warrior, barely able to maintain his emotions. The Tau believed the Kroot to be dead, and now they fight them on Terra. The Ethereals announced the extinction of the Kroot to the masses. The Ethereals themselves, Barolinus, the demmed Kroot, have made liars of them, and I will not stand for it. At that he drew Agislus with a ring and thrust the sword up into the air. We go to make war with them. I will personally see the Kroot extinguished from this existence for all time. Barolinus fell to one knee immediately as he heard this. I am with you always, my Primarch. Then rise, Barolinus, and ready your weapons of war. We go to slaughter the Kroot, and this traitorous start that allies with them. Barolinus rose slowly as he heard this, his eyes narrowing. Start. Yes. The word came direct from one of our Shaso field commanders only a few moments ago. He describes a warrior clad in the armor of death, black as the void, deadly and inviolable. Inviolable? Faced with the might of a Primarch, we shall see, my lord. The Ultramarine answered. Guilliman inclined his head at this. That we shall. Part 142. Destiny's Path. The Eternity Wall Gate. Santarius said, jabbing his finger onto the crumpled field map. This is the closest of the gates to our current position, and the one that the War Master defends. Excellent. Kodian replied, standing back so as to allow the Commissar to roll the chart back up and place it in the field pack of his PDF adjutant. It is Calgar that we need to find, he said to the others. Ventress may be our only chance of persuading the War Master to hear us. If we cannot convince him to listen, all may yet be lost. Orekiel sighed and peered down the length of the half-lit alleyway, its furthest point far from visible. We have kilometers of hostile territory to cross before we reach the gate. I don't understand it. Why didn't he? She lowered her voice then, as if only just considering the ominous of what she was about to say. Next. Why didn't Centurius carry us closer to the palace, or even better, place us within its walls? Perhaps he could not. Chivok answered, the tone of his voice indicating that he was far from sure of the answer himself. We are speaking of the Emperor's palace. Not even the Grand Masters of the Inquisition know much of the ancient and vaunted defenses at work in that place. The Imperial Palace is undoubtedly the most secure fastness in all the known galaxy. It is said that all the power of the Chaos Gods combined is not enough to penetrate its walls. It stands to reason that, for all his mystery, Centurius could not exert his influence any closer to its walls than he did. Murmurs of agreement passed through the others, for in truth, none of them had the slightest idea what manner of ancient and archaic technology guarded the Emperor's remains. Santarius had heard only part of what the discussion entailed, and cleared his throat once he was sure it was over. We have to press on. The Tau have spies everywhere. They utilize technology that we have thus far been unable to counter. They wear suits that are able to turn them invisible to the naked eye, and emit signals powerful enough to confound the most sophisticated aspects. Yes, we have encountered them. Kodian replied. Before he was able to say any more, the Shaper pushed his way through, regarding both the chaplain and the Commissar as he did so. My best trackers have the surrounding city covered. I assure you, if there are enemy units stalking us, we will find them, hidden or not. Not even the Tau are able to mask their scent from us. Nonetheless, we are far from out of danger. The Commissar replied. You should know, Chaplain, that the concentration of the enemy vastly increases as we near the Eternity Wall Gate. It is quite possible that we will not be able to bypass the Unity forces there in order to reach the War Master. We will worry about that when the occasion arrives. For now, we must be sure of the plan. At this he turned to face the group as a whole. Groker has agreed to provide us with a diversion. His forces will assault the rear of the Unity lines, while we seek a way to reach the War Master. To engage the Tau will be an honor, the Kroot said, bunching his skeletal hand into a fist. My warriors thirst for their blood. It is up to us to make the War Master see that the Kroot are not the enemy. Kodian continued. How we are to put ourselves in that situation is something we are going to have to play by ear. Santarius nodded. Then we had better make haste to the gate, and hope that our approach goes unnoticed. The Ziggurat Imperialis the Imperial Palace Terra. Light first flickered and then burst through the dark chamber, illuminating the cavernous interior. It glinted and ran like quicksilver over the angles of the golden being hovering in wait there. A pair of intense eyes witnessed the growing phenomenon, the emotion behind them unreadable. I have been waiting for you. The tall figure that formed before him was easily far larger, albeit of a more slender stature. It exuded a searing white light which all but enveloped its form, but what little could be seen of the figure beneath shone and ran, as if made of the most dazzling fluid silver. My congratulations on your deceit. It would seem that we are not as far separated from one another as I had considered. Your deception is over. The silver being uttered, its very voice causing the air in the chamber to rise into a chill wind. That it is. The loss of my role as the ruler of this world is of little true consequence to my plans. In time you will come to see that the need for secrecy is over. Moment of silence passed between the two ageless beings. After a while, Mafaran spoke once more, a wide smile stretching across his face. Things have changed. I feel your hunger, your desire. It does not matter how obvious you convey this, I do not fear you. Yes, you are more powerful than I could ever hope to be, but physical power is irrelevant now. They stir, you know that as well as I. They will come to feast here. The shining being did not respond. Not even you have the power to face them both, and you know that. They will raise this existence. And in their voraciousness they will undo all we have both sought to achieve. These stars will be not but a wasteland, bland and tasteless. It is not our intent to exterminate all life, but to culture it, to dominate it. They would see us denied that. And yet you summoned them. Yes. Only together can we stand against them. We cannot share these stars with them. They must be destroyed for all time, and only together can we achieve this. Dominance will be mine alone. His counterpart replied. At that the luminosity around him intensified, filling the chamber with light. Do not be a fool. Yes, I summoned them, for I would see this war fall into anarchy and oblivion, rather than leave myself open to your mercy. The slaughter would have attracted them to the harvest with or without my intervention. We want the same things, you and I destroy me and you have no chance at ultimate victory. We have to labor together to see our campaigns realized. I have ensured that much. Dominance will be mine alone. The being repeated. Seconds later he was gone. Lone in the darkness Mepharan smiled. We shall see. Guilliman strode through the billowing steam and out onto the surface of Terra. He swept his cloak aside as he surveyed the scene. Fire warriors filled his gaze as far as he could see, choking the vast mezzanine. Devilfish, skyrays and hammerheads glided free of the vast landers to form elongated convoys of armor. Everywhere he looked, the magnificence of the Unity dominated the scene. Status report. He commanded, directing the order to the short, stocky Tau at his side. The intelligence officer's cybernetic hand worked the controls of the tactical unit hard-hired into his opposing arm. The command drone hovering by his side emitted a series of whining bleeps as it processed the swathes of information at its disposal. The area is clear of any enemy presence, Kaigyu La. Our scouts are deployed and in the field. We have their trail. Good. What of the dispersal of our forces here? I would know how they are faring. Of course. LL3 Major Shan ALS are currently engaged in assaulting the gates. Omog Drak and his forces are still deploying around the ultimate gate. OKIR Laws Shas Kaon have engaged the Marines, defending the Lion's Gate. Shaso Tashvar Korst Lalarshi Vrya leads her forces against the ultimate gate. ND what of the pacification of the inner city? Ongoing, Kaigyu La. So far our forces have encountered fierce resistance but we are pushing through steadily. There has been little to stall our advance. I see. Do we have an estimate on casualties? I am afraid not, my commander. It is against the teachings of the UNS to collate such data. Of course it is. Guilliman replied, cursing himself. Ensure that you maintain a strong link with the network. Liaise with the stealth and pathfinder teams, have them begin to plot our advance through these streets. The location of the Kroot is our top priority. Yes, Kaigyu La. He turned to the warrior at his side then, his face tight and serious beneath the weight of the task to come. I am still concerned by the apparent disappearance of the Alpha Legion, Barolinus. By this stage, they should already have been deep within the city, rousing the cold sleeper cells. You were the only one to survive when the Legion command was slaughtered. Is there anything you can tell me? Where are they? Barolinus did not answer. Guilliman caught sight of the rapt wonder upon the Marine's face as he took in his surroundings. The expression was innocent, almost childlike, and yet hidden deep. Beneath it he could see a lingering darkness, an almost ageless hunger. Such an observation troubled him greatly. Barolinus. The Marine shook himself, as if dismissing some potent enchantment. The look on his face faded as he locked eyes with the Primarch and he cleared his throat. Forgive me, Lord. It is just I never imagined this. I never envisaged myself here on hallowed Terra. Terra is hallowed no longer, Berollinus. Guilliman replied with a sneer. The weakness of the Imperium has afflicted her, weakened her. A cancer of treachery and sedition ravages this world. All that the Emperor wrought is undone. No, you stand on a world far fallen from grace. We are here to restore that grace. Berollinus bowed his head at his master's wisdom. The Alpha Legion. Guilliman said again, as much a demand as a question. Images of his last encounter with the warriors of the Alpha Legion flashed through his mind and he shook himself, banishing the ominous memories. The warriors of that legion are an enigma to me. Perhaps the demise of command structure caused them concern enough to flee in the face of the Tau. Or perhaps there is more to this than meets the eye. Guilliman answered, suspicion dominating his expression. I will deal with this mystery when this war is over. For now, our immediate goal is clear. We hunt the Kroot. Shame, said the voice in Berollinus's head. He burns with shame at the survival of the Kroot. This is the being you worship, Berollinus. This is your flawless Primarch. He is weak and he is afraid of the wrath of his Xenos master. Would you willingly serve such weakness? Berollinus rotated his neck slowly and fell in by the Primarch's side. For all his apparent indifference, he could not hide the glimmer of doubt in his eyes. The Imperial Basilica the Imperial City Terra The light of the electro candle guttered in the priest's hands, his own palsied grasp adding to the motion of the light. The vastness of the catacombs of heroes stretched out around him as far as the scarce light would allow him to see. His every step caused clouds of eons-old dust to billow up around him, but Father Lestercio paid the choking atmosphere little heed. He had lost all contact with the roving arco-flagellant tomb sentries more than 3 days ago, and this troubled him greatly. To lose contact with one, or maybe two, would not have given him cause for due concern, but here in the lowest reaches of the Holy Basilica, the area was unimaginably vast. And the silent and twisted guardians many. He froze as a sound in the darkness echoed through the endless arched expanse. Eyes that had been augmented to peer through the perpetual gloom flitted from shadow to shadow, searching for the source of the noise. Who goes there? He cried, his voice breaking. Show yourself. Who disturbs the sanctity of the catacombs? This is a hallowed place. There was no reply. Lestercio shivered and drew his simple robes about him, as if the numbing cold had suddenly increased further. He was alone down here, to all intents and purposes. His sentry skulls flitted through the void. Around him, the illumination radiated by their crimson eyes barely visible. Another servo skull hovered by his side, the miniaturist multilaser mounted beneath it cycling in readiness. Far above his head the war for Terra continued to rage. As guardian of the catacombs, he was the only one left here to defend the ancient site, for it was a serious crime to leave the catacombs unguarded, even if the role was primarily a ceremonial one. Nothing had disturbed the serenity of the vast tomb complex for an age, and now a distant whine snatched his attention and he scoured the gloom, searching for the telltale light signature of the sentry skulls. He could see nothing, not even the faintest glow. Return to me, he called, feeling the fear building inside him. The unit by his side became agitated, responding empathically to its master's state of mind. It began to cycle around him, probing the gloom with its searchlight eyes. There was no response to the priest's call, and this only caused Lestercio to grow even more concerned. Something was definitely amiss down here and he knew it. He began to whisper beneath his breath, praying to the Emperor to deliver him to safety. It was as if the air round him had grown far colder in a matter of seconds, and he dismissed any suspicions of his own imagination when he saw his own breath streaming from his mouth, white and clouded in the air. He could take no more. Petrified almost beyond the edge of reason, he cast around on his heel and made to run, a sensation of utter panic enveloping him. There was a whine and a flash and his silent Guardian disappeared amid a shower of sparks, wheeling away into the gloom. RGH. No. Please. Something vast filled his vision, a wall of smooth ivory, pitted with age and smeared with a dark crimson crust. He raised his eyes to meet the terrible twin voids of the thing's burning gaze. Emperor, save me, he whispered. The Emperor did not answer. Deep within the vast walls of the Imperial Palace, Mephiran stirred. He looked out into the darkness and smiled. There they are. Last. Of course, he could not see them, not physically, but such a being had no need to obey the lesser laws of reality. He could sense the shift, he could feel them, master as he was of the stuff of creation. Every single thing in the universe affected its surroundings, and Mephiran was one of the few who knew how to read the signs of change. The ancient machines around him whispered, cogitator banks and logic stacks stirring at his words if imbued with a life of their own. Yes, I sense them. Unleash them, I will not intervene. We have a common enemy, you and I make war with the ancient enemy, let them see that we will not tolerate their interference. The whispering of the machines intensified, and his expression told of the fact that he relished the clear agitation of his counterpart. I know you mean to send them after the masters of life. Do not seek to try and unnerve me. I would destroy them on sight. No, they hunt another target, I know that. You were wise to heed my warning. Kill the old ones, and the forces of life will fall apart. Part 143. The Eternity Wall Run. Ka shivered, a visible and unexpected occurrence. Ventress felt the sudden emotional change within the being beside him as a physical sensation and glanced towards his mysterious Xenos counterpart. He did not need to ask the question. The dark being sensed his attention and looked his way, his vast eyes blinking once. They are abroad once again. The Void Champions. He has sent them to hunt for me. Then Cian's eye narrowed as he heard this and he gestured around him at the vast sea of Lian's forces. Then let them come. We are legion. They will find here is death. Events progress at an ominous pace, warrior. Ka replied, his voice low and heavy with palpable caution. It was clear by his manner that he took little solace in the Ultramarine's reassurances. Would that you were able to comprehend all that is destined to pass. Your Emperor has passed into the final phase of his existence. He is free now, and his wrath will be terrible, but his ultimate destiny will take time to be realized. Look above you. Ka gestured up at the skies, and Ventress followed the Old One's gaze. The firmament was in a state of constant flux. It was no longer recognizable as the sky. Vast clouds of multi-hued, glittering energy swam and churned above them, as if a storm was building. This was far from any natural phenomenon, Ventress knew that with utter certainty. What is it? His legacy, Uriel Ventress. He is free now, at last. You could not know it, but your Emperor has desired this for so long. He has sat upon his throne for an age, awaiting this final death. He is free now, and his wrath will know no bounds. What is happening? Ventress asked, unable to tear his gaze away from the building, ever-changing phenomenon. I can feel it. Something builds. He calls them. Ka answered, his voice barely more than a whisper. He is the shepherd, and he calls his flock to war. You cannot comprehend the scale of the conflict that is to come, but you must be ready for it. Heed my words, Uriel Ventress. Be prepared. Ventress did not know how to answer the enigmatic Xenos. Although he understood little of what Ka said, something in his voice confirmed his every claim, as if the truth of the Old One's words was a palpable and doubtless thing. It was as if his every cell was designed to recognize the being's benevolence and sincerity. Like the Emperor and the Primarchs, he found he could not doubt anything the alien claimed. It was a feeling of ancient and utter trust. The Prophet comes. Ka said then, extending a hand out towards the towering structures beyond the gate. The one you know of as Kodian. He comes, and he leads an army. He will be the making of this war. Kodian, Ventress echoed, following the alien's gaze out beyond the armies of the Unity. He hadn't actually expected to be able to see his old comrade, and nor could he. There are many who will come seeking his death, for he has been blessed by your emperor to be his avatar. He is but mortal, but his role is a symbolic one. He represents courage, determination and denial, and these are anathema to the enemy. He is to be the conduit, the link. He will forge an army, the likes of which even the Unity cannot stand against. Ventress's eyes remained fixed on the distant city, and his heart soared at hearing this, despite the incredulity in his soul. He had recognized this quality in Codian since the first moments of their reunion, and had found that he could not deny it. It was this that had urged him to aid the chaplain's flight, even in the face of the War Master's wrath, and now Ka's words served only to affirm that decision. "What can we do?" he asked quietly, suddenly feeling the weight of this knowledge bearing down upon him. "We have to have faith. We must have faith in him. His destiny is guided by a higher power, and we must trust that all this, as terrible and apocalyptic as it may seem, is but a precursor. I know that you have witnessed the horror and power of a star god with your own eyes, Uriel Ventress, and such an experience changes the heart and soul. That is why I tell you and you alone of the nightmare that is to come, for there is only you that can even begin to appreciate it." Ventress fell silent then, his heart quickened at the mention of that horrific encounter on Pavinus centuries ago. The dark thing. The specter of death. You know it. Ka inclined his head slowly on confirmation. The ancient enemy of life, yes. The Eldar gave him the name Kalis Ra, for he is the master of death. And the horror that is his existence is carved into the souls of all living things. You keep that fear deep within your soul, hidden and guarded, but I can sense it still. Once, Kalis Ran and his kind were many, but now only 4 of the star gods remain. They will gather once more, and soon, to reap the lives of every living thing here. We must prevent this. How? How can we stop this from happening? When Codian comes, heed his word. Trust in him, for there are those who will allow rage to blind them to the truth. Alone, he may be unable to convince them of his intentions. He will need you, Uriel Ventress. Do not fail him. .. Codian stepped to one side as another of the massive, lumbering beasts stomped by him. The Master Shaper had called these huge bipedal beasts Narlox, and explained to him that they were, in fact, a subspecies of the Kroot race. Groker had assured him that the beasts would not aggressively towards him or his companions. But Codian found it hard to fully accept this, and with good reason. The Narlox were fearsome creatures, massive and predatory. They bore many physical similarities to the Kroot, but where the Kroot were intelligent and articulate, the Narlox were bestial and imposing. He could smell the oily stench of the creatures despite the filters in his helm, and could only imagine how discomfiting the collective odor must be for the others accompanying him. The Master Shaper had ordered the lumbering beasts forward in readiness to meet the Tau forces at the gate. Many of them carried huge but crude bolt throwers at their backs, armed with explosive bolts. Along with the sharp-shooting squads, these would provide the covering fire needed to allow him and the others to reach the friendly lines. The Codian had just returned from a forward scouting mission with several of the Pathfinder Kroot. He nodded to each of the aliens in turn and they dispersed, sinking back into the main Kroot army. We are close to the rear of the Unity lines, Chaplain. The going ahead will be tough. The enemy is spread wide across the gate. It's going to be one hell of a fight to push through. We will carve a path through them. Groker answered. He tore the bone and feather totem hanging at his neck free and stooped low to place it on the ground, emitting a series of quiet, whooping clicks as he did so. Taking the curved blade at his rifle's haft, he scooped the totem up and flung it out into the deserted street before him. Whatever this meant, Codian had no idea, but the symbolism of it was not lost upon the Kroot. Warbles and squawks drifted through the alien army, noises of confirmation at the Shaper's apparent order or request. We will pierce the heart of the Unity, Groker said, looking to the Chaplain. And the lifeblood will Drain from the enemy's assault. Many spirits will find their way to the ancestors this day. As he spoke, Kodian saw a cold and hazy light grow behind the Shaper's eyes. Groker's beak fell open, and his quills stood on end. What is it? Kodian whispered. The Master Shaper spun on his heel and rose to his full height. He glanced down the street the way they had come. The enemy. They come. Kodian felt his entire body tense as he heard this. He brought his weapons up and started out after the Shaper, who had begun to wave his way through the Kroot, his attention ever fixed to the way they had come. What is it, Kroot? What do you sense? The enemy, Kodian. They are behind us. The news took several seconds to sink in. The chaplain watched as Kroot began to blink from existence in response to their commander's revelation. Torvus shouldered past him, a low growl issuing from between his lips. It would seem that we are to see action sooner than we expected. Let them come. No, Groker answered, twisting at the waist to hold a hand out at the Marine's advance. You must continue. Fate has set you on this path, and you must not falter. Kodian heard this and felt a shiver pass through his soul. He could feel the Dawnblade in his grasp, pulling in the direction of the gate. He knew the path he had to take, and that knowledge lodged itself within his heart like a shard of ice. He threw a curt nod at the Master Shaper and pivoted around to face the direction of the gates. Press on. To the ultimate gate, as fast as you can. He set off on a loping stride that quickly accelerated into a sprint, passing the others by in seconds. This initially bewildered Chivok and the others, who watched aghast as the chaplain thundered past. What are you waiting for? Orekiel snapped, snatching at his robes. Move your Horus damned. Chivok whispered a swift prayer at his counterpart's curse and stumbled after her, soon finding his feet. Kodian ignored the pounding of the blood in his veins as he negotiated his way through the divergent Kroot mass, weaving past the lumbering Krootuks and Narloks. Massive feet crashed to the ground beside him, causing him to compensate for each thunderous impact as he bore on. Before him, flocks of winged Kroot took to the air, carried aloft on small and membranous wings. Many of the aliens came about to run in the opposite direction, intent on engaging the enemy forces, bearing down upon them. He threw himself out onto the street, the walls of the alleyway folding away to reveal a wide boulevard fringed with tall administratum buildings. Paper choked the streets, drifting in clouds across the wide expanse. Data slates were strewn far and wide, most broken and ruined. Piles of blackened brass cogitator banks formed makeshift barricades across the road, but most of these roadblocks had been breached, blasted aside by whatever enemy force had passed this way previously. He heard the former Tau ambassador holler something behind him and he cast around in time to see Gormat's face, his expression a mask of fear. The Tau was pointing out into the street, his voice high-pitched and screaming. A single phrase stood out amongst the aliens' rant, and although he neither recognized nor understood it, the sinister weight of its implications was enough to grab his attention. REA denial node. He felt his entire body rock as something powerful and violent exploded mere meters away from him. Pain coursed through him as tens of small but deadly detonations assailed his armor, burning through the thick ceramite and into his flesh. His rosary ooze flared and the Dawnblade thrashed within his grasp, its otherworldly influence denying the damage done to his body. Scores of Kroot fell around him, and despite his pain he looked on as Gormat arced back, the aliens' gray flesh lacerated in a dozen places. The next few seconds passed in a blur. He watched as Umbras sprinted forward and plucked the stricken Tau from the ground. Gormat was hurt but alive, his many injuries not enough to threaten his life. He saw the threat then as he spun on his heel, feeling the anger at the attack building within him. Scattered across the square were several unrecognizable constructs, clearly Tau in origin. Large, circular constructs several meters across, each one was identical. Each sported a bowl-shaped base and a brace of weapons Kodian had come to know of as rail cannons, and was similar in design to the automated turrets they had encountered. Find cover! He shouted, watching as the nearest of the devices unleashed another whining double blast. The blasts spread as they screamed towards the Kroot, and the chaplain looked on in horror as the submunitions exploded. Kroot literally disintegrated beneath the powerful attack. Unprotected bodies were ripped to shreds. Nothing able to protect them. Kodian had found a short stone wall and is crouched behind it, only his head and shoulders above the protective cover. A quick glance around him confirmed that the others of his collective were unharmed, except for Gormat, whose injuries were ominous but not threatening to his life. There was no sign of Groker. At that moment, he didn't know if the Master Shaper was somewhere amongst the Kroot, or if he had doubled back to face the coming enemy. For all he knew, Groker could even be dead. Just then he felt a tingling, hazy warmth in his mind, and a moment later long fingers curled around his shoulder guard. The Master Shaper's eyes pulsed with light as he gave the chaplain a nod of reassurance and then rose, ignoring the danger. He lifted his head and let out a series of gruff, avian screeches, the harsh sounds carrying far over the tumult of the melee. Kroot responded to this indecipherable command, surging forth despite the threat. Hulking Narlochs bounded towards the defense nodes, the Kroot at their backs unleashing streams of explosive bolts at the machines. Kodian rose to his feet and gestured for the others to follow him. Another double blast speared from one of the constructs, this time a brace of the solid projectiles he had come to know and rightly fear. He threw a hand up to his face instinctively as one of the mighty beasts came apart in an explosion of gore, torn to shreds by the power and velocity of the twin shot. "We need to get out of here. Follow me." The towering walls of the palace were visible now, high above even the tallest of the surrounding buildings. Scorched papers gusted past his face and he swept them away, fighting to identify the best route to the gate while they still had a chance of success. There. To his left he spied another long boulevard twisting away from sight. The road was lined with tall golden statues supported by plinths of the purest white marble. Many of the statues had been toppled by the Unity bombardment, and now lay in ruins upon the street, forlorn and blackened. "This way," he said, setting off across the dangerous expanse of no man's land. Ligor, Torvis and Umbras shifted to the outer edges of the group, forming a protective ring around the others. They were halfway across the expanse when the first signs of the pursuing enemy showed themselves. Kodian noticed a shadow pass over him, small but noticeable, and he raised his eyes to peer up into the skies above, seeking the source of the outline. Remora! Remora! It was Gormat. Once again the Tau's keen eye had detected the threat, despite his condition. Kodian watched as the small drone aircraft began a lazy turn, almost sure that he could sense its attention upon him. Moments later, it drifted out of sight. Moments after that, the first attack run came. A squadron of barracudas screamed in towards them from the depths of the city, guns blazing. Bright shimmering ion blasts carved through the Kroot, killing without pause or mercy. Almost at the same instant he became aware of the scream of more familiar engines, and a glance in the opposite direction confirmed his suspicions. He heard the Kodian let out a whoop of joy as he too recognized the Imperial aircraft. There were several of them, much smaller than their Tau counterparts, and faster. The fighter craft took only seconds to sweep over the troubled Kroot forces, and it took Kodian only a second to realize he had made a grave error of judgment. Lascannon blasts lanced through the Kroot, cutting entire kindreds in two. Auto-cannon fire burst bodies apart like ripped fruit, sending clouds of gore drifting across the wide junction. Emperor's oath, they betray us, Kodian breathed, watching as the two squadrons passed each other by without incident or exchange. It was only then that he noticed the enemy markings on the flanks of the lightning fighters and realized how foolish he had been to assume them friendly in the first place. Treacherous BDS. He heard Torvis growl. The first explosions began to filter through the tumult, and he knew then that the Kroot rearguard had engaged this new enemy force. He found himself barely able to comprehend how this enemy force had managed to gain on them so quickly, but he knew it was pointless to dwell on such questions. All that mattered now was that they reach the Alliance in time. He had no idea what was coming for him. Part 144. Nemesis. Everything was chaos. Many of the automated defenses still survived, and were reaping a heavy toll upon the Kroot forces. Now that the Master Shaper seemed to have decided his fate lied with facing the enemy rearguard, the distinction between the two forces was once again becoming apparent. A quick glance behind him and he saw that only humans followed him now. Kroot continued to peel away from the mass as kindred after kindred left to face the coming enemy. There were many thousands of Kroot here on Terra, but there were nowhere near that many here. Groker had brought with him perhaps 500 to 600 warriors, and Kodian had no idea where the rest of the Kroot forces were. Many were still no doubt in orbit, fighting the ships of the Unity. Many more had also already perished here, for the Kroot had suffered more than most in this war. Thousands of others were dispersed throughout the city, fighting running battles just like this one. This saddened Kodian, for he knew in his heart that it would be this scattered separation that would sign the death knell of the race. United, they may have stood a chance. He could see little hope for them now. The familiar face of Commissar Santarius faded in and out of the shifting mass behind him. Most of the Imperial defenders they had found had all but disappeared in the hours following their encounter, entire squads enveloped by the sheer number of Kroot. Now that the Master Shaper had called his warriors to war, the beleaguered defenders were once more distinct and visible. Kodian slowed a little as he noticed the Commissar struggling to catch up with him. A look of appreciation passed over the aging officer's face as he caught up at last, his features red with exertion. "We have about 1.5 kilometers to go," Santarius guessed, pointing the tip of his saber out into the distance. Kodian followed the gesture and found himself staring at the magnificence of the Eternity Wall Gate for the first time. They had passed into the wide, statue-lined boulevard a short time ago, and now they were on a path that headed straight for the gate itself. Kodian took in the sight and his analytical mind quickly confirmed the Commissar's estimation. Kodian's eyesight, however, was far keener than that of his counterpart, and there was one important fact that the Commissar had left out of his assessment. "We have around 1 kilometer before we reach the rear of the enemy forces," Kodian observed. "We had better hope that we are able to find a way around or through the Unity forces, for there is no way we can hope to fight them." "We are with you, Chaplain, whatever fate may bring," Santarius replied. "Life or death, as long as we do our duty, it matters not what happens to us." Kodian dearly wished he could respond to this, but he could not. For the first time in his life he found he could not reply, for he knew that, whatever he said, it would sound hollow and emotionless. It was highly likely that the Commissar would find his end here, and soon. The inevitability of death hung heavy over them all, and Kodian knew they all would be hard-pressed to escape its grasp. "We must fight to ensure that it does not come to that, Commissar," Kodian said, finally finding his voice. "The soldiers of the Emperor are no longer expendable, the Tau have seen to that. Every breath we take brings with it an opportunity to oppose the Unity, and we must continue to do that for as long as we can. This is our duty. Then the enemy will find themselves hard-pressed to put an end to my life," Santarius answered, his resolve fueled by the chaplain's words. The scream of aircraft engines drowned out all other noises for a moment and Kodian looked skyward to see the weak sunlight fade to darkness. Scores of Unity aircraft passed overhead, and for a second he expected to see his end descending from above. The bombardment did come, but not in the way he had expected. He looked on as the skies began to fall, hundreds of large cylindrical objects twisting lazily towards the ground. None of the others needed to tell him what they were, he knew only too well. Automated turrets. Yet more of them. He watched as the objects continued to tumble and found himself at last beginning to understand how the Tau had been able to rise to power so quickly. Their use of and reliance on machines was near total. The Tau themselves were as stars in the heavens, and yet their numbers paled in comparison to the drones and semi-sentient war machines they employed. Such a complete reliance on technology was a dangerous thing, Kodian knew this without a doubt. Much of the Imperium's ancient history was soured by such ages, and the lessons were there to be learned. No good would come of the Unity's reliance on artificial intelligence, he knew that. He started to slow, realizing that to continue to charge headlong towards the waiting gates would be to invite death. The first of the turrets were already slowing as they neared the ground, retros and guidance thrusters bringing them to a controlled stop. By the time they reached the area it would be saturated by the constructs, and they would be hard-pressed to survive the journey, let alone bypass the forces awaiting them. The numbing realization that they were very much caught in an ever-worsening situation weighed heavily on Codian, and it was a feeling that could only increase. Circumstances were becoming more and more desperate with the passing of each moment, and, try as he might, he could not envisage a way through this nightmare. He glanced before him and then behind him again and again, searching for any answer he could find. "I am not done yet," he whispered, unwilling to give up the task that now so totally consumed his existence. Santarius scoured the surroundings, junctions and intersections, frustration etched upon his face. "Damn it. None of us are familiar with this area, Chaplain. We could risk taking any one of these side streets, but I can't guarantee if any of them lead to the palace." Codian shook his head slowly. "Tell your troops to find cover and dig in," he answered quietly. "It looks as if this is as far as we go." Slowly but surely the deflated Imperials did as they were ordered. Arbits began to take charge, directing the soldiers of the Terran PDF, the Guard, and the scattered units of Skitarii how best to use the familiar buildings of the Imperial city in the coming conflict. Codian made sure the Imperials and Kroot that were still with them were well on their way to securing themselves against the inevitable fight when a sudden occurrence caused him to start. He wheeled around, almost firing his reloaded bolt pistol, as something flashed into existence. Groker appeared, borne by a brace of the warp-jumping Kroot. All three were battered and bloodied but devoid of any serious injury. Codian, the Master Shaper, stumbled forward, fighting his way free of his companions. Though utterly alien, Codian recognized the expression on Groker's face as one he knew only too well. Fear. Beware. He comes, Codian. The armored giant. We cannot stop him. Hoots and cries of panic rose up from the approaching Kroot forces hot on the Master Shaper's heels. Lithe bodies surged through the streets in their hundreds, so thick that entire kindreds rubbed shoulders in their flight. The Unity came after them without mercy, skimmers and tanks darting from the depths of the city to lay down withering salvos of fire. At first he could be forgiven for assuming that the Kroot were fleeing before the power and violence of the attack. It was only as Groker grabbed his arm and thrust his beaked face closer. "Take flight, Codian. My warriors fight to keep the enemy at bay, but the giant's fury knows no bounds. Stay, and he will kill you. He will kill you all." Codian flung the Master Shaper away from him and threw himself into a roll as one of the powerful hovering tanks swooped by overhead. The powerful dual cannons mounted to its turret spun a hail of azure death, and none who were caught in its path could stand against its fury. Burst cannon. Rounds raked the ground, chewing up Kroot as if they were nothing. The Chaplain rolled up onto his feet and slid into cover, twisting around the crumbling section of wall, and coming about in time to send a trio of shots out at the burning thrusters of the departing craft. He could not see Groker, but guessed that the Master Shaper was safe, for he had thrown him clear of the deadly cannon's path. Yet more of the skimming war machines tore down the wide boulevard over the heads of the scattering Kroot, punching holes through the defenseless warriors. "Head for the gate. Find the safest route you can and get to safety," he called to his comrades and the Imperial Collective. His idea to stay and face the coming force had been short-lived, for now, in the face of such ominous news, they had little choice but to try and realize the original plan. His thoughts swam then, as if the inside of his head became thick and pressurized. The dawn blade in his hands looked to grow, not just simply in volume as it had done before, but in power and presence, as if to tower over him, envelop him. He knew the phenomenon was all in his head, and yet he could not help but feel as if the powerful sentience within the ancient weapon had him in its grasp. He comes, prophet. He seeks your destruction. Try to beat him and he will destroy you. Who? He asked, his own voice distant and muffled to him. Even as the question left his lips, his mind reeled, as if the answer had always dwelt inside him. You know who? The voice said, confirming his deepest suspicions. A part of you has awaited this day. Since first you opened your eyes here, De Locodian. There is no more time to delay. Now you must run. The presence was such an fundamental part of him now that it was as if it dare not utter the name. That burned in his mind. It retreated then, and the warped perspective dissipated, disgorging him back into reality. He took a deep, heaving breath, as if he had been deprived of air, and cast around. Something huge and incredibly fast barged its way through the Kroot, scattering broken bodies as a raging storm. Wood saplings in its wake. The speeding shape ground to a halt with such force that it tore the ground up as it slowed, sending chunks of rockcrete curling before it like surf. Such was the vast figure's speed that its azure outline blurred with each movement. Steel flashed and ran fluid before it, carving Kroot into bloodied strips of flesh and bone. None could counter its terrible attacks, and in that clear and horrific split second, Codian knew the moment he had so feared for so long had come to pass. Without a word he pivoted on his heel and sprinted away, his legs driving into the ground. Had he waited but a second later, he would have caught sight of another, shorter, armor-clad figure arriving on the scene. The Marine swept his hammer before him as he scanned his surroundings, and caught sight of the retreating warrior in the dark armor of a chaplain. Perched on his shoulder, the avian cyber construct unleashed a dual high-pitched cry of confirmation. The bird's senses were now entwined with his own, an extension of his own, and this confirmed it. My lord. There. Robert Gilliman's head snapped around at his ward's call, and his dark eyes widened. The chaplain who allies himself with this cannibal traitor filth. He is mine. Codian ran. He ran as fast as he could, not through fear or cowardice but through necessity. As much as the fact infuriated him, he knew in his heart that this was a necessary course of action. Still, another part of him could not bear to look back, almost afraid of what he would see, and what that sight could confirm. His Primarch was long dead. His body was held in stasis still, or worse, unthinkable even, abused and violated by the Tau. Robert Gilliman, son of the Emperor, was dead, and would remain so until his own eyes confirmed any different. Ligur and the others were some way ahead of him at this point, and that gave him a measure of relief. Had any of them any idea what was happening behind them, then they would doubtless fold. For how could any man not? He had to keep pushing. He had to get to Calgar and the commanders of the Alliance. Tremors rocked the ground beneath his feet and he felt his dual pulses quicken. He doubted the fact that he had ever ran as fast in all his life, and yet, given the rapid increase of the thunderous vibrations, he knew then it was not enough. His instincts took over and he leapt, twisting in the air as he began to descend. At that instant he saw it. He saw him. He saw an opponent he could not hope to outrun, or to best in combat. He saw an opponent that could not be felled by bolt round or chain blade, and whose speed and power were more than a match for even the unforgiving bite of the Dawnblade. He saw death denied, and life, of a fashion, restored. He saw his greatest, most euphoric dreams end. His worst nightmares, as large as life. He saw the hate, and that cut him to the bone. Silver flashed by him and he raised the Dawnblade up to parry it, his own reflexes greatly augmented by the energies of the living weapon. Blinding energies coruscated before his eyes and he felt the ground slam into his back, the impact causing exhaust gases to vent from his punished power plant. The ground shook as he rolled to the side, hearing the ring of steel on rockcrete, through rockcrete, and he pushed himself up onto his feet in time to parry another mighty blow. The impact was immense. His every bone rattled as he parried the blow, the servo bundles that powered his suit's motive systems screaming in protest. He survived another blow, and then another. The last strike drove him back into the wall of a building with such force that it cracked the gray Pharaoh Plaster, but there was no time to rest and gather his thoughts. He threw his head to one side, a heartbeat before the wide blade punched into the wall up to the hilt, and he found himself staring at a fist large enough to turn his helm to bloodied scrap with a single blow. The Primarch of the Ultramarines glared at him, those terrible black eyes shining with utter contempt for his very existence. I see the colors of a son of Ultramar upon your shoulder, Chaplain, and such a sight breaks my heart. I am laid low with grief to see how far my magnificent sons have fallen, but that grief will serve to fuel me as I wipe away the stinking film of heresy that suffocates the dying heart of my lost Imperium. Guilliman's words were cold and measured, yet Codian could feel the conviction behind them. No foe had ever hated him as much as the towering behemoth before him did, and that fact was enough to encase his heart in ice. Face to face, in that lingering and eternal moment, Codian knew he could never see those black alien eyes so close again. I know, my Primarch, he whispered. I know how lost and utterly alone you are, the true Rabut Guilliman. I will save you, my lord. I vow this. Guilliman unleashed a shuddering roar of rage and tore Codian's helm from him with all the effort it would take a man to pull the pin from a grenade. Codian let out a cry of pain as the helm was wrenched free, sealing rings bursting and spinning away. I would look upon the face of one truly lost, the Primarch uttered. For my eyes bear the true and full judgment of the creed. I find you wanting. Guilliman's head lurched forward then, its entire outline blurring for a second. Codian slid down the wall and rolled out of harm's way as the Primarch crashed into the wall, his vast weight causing him to stagger through the thick partition. He felt a strong hand drag him to his feet and looked into the eyes of Torvis, the head of the mighty hammer in his other hand smoldering with the discharge of the energies it had just unleashed. Torvis said nothing as he hauled the chaplain after him. His face wore an expression of anguish and disbelief, as if he could not believe his own actions. Behind them, a terrible and inhuman roar of unfettered rage shook the air. Make it to safety, Chaplain, the hulking Marine whispered, guiding him in the direction of the others. Venge me. Codian felt the warrior's grip loosen and sank away from sight. He glanced over his shoulder in time to see the Death Watch Marine turn to face the emerging behemoth, his vaunted hammer ready for combat. Beyond the Primarch, the rest of the Unity forces surged after them. Torvis. Marine, no. Torvis met Guilliman as the Primarch advanced, steadfast and unafraid. The Primarch raised his mighty sword and prepared to strike the defiant warrior down. This will end only one way, traitor. Guilliman shouted, looming over the smaller warrior. In death, yes. Torvis answered. And I am not afraid, for I will die with defiance in my heart, and all the fury and power of a Primarch will not change that. With that he thrust the head of his hammer out at the coming Leviathan and awaited his end. Guilliman was upon him in seconds. His first strike smashed against the storm shield of his opponent, with enough force to utterly annihilate the device's field generator. Racing flares of bright energy coruscated around the cruciform shield, and then the thick refractive plate gave way, splitting down the middle. Torvis staggered back, sparks spitting from the plate of his shield arm. He swung the hammer and caught the Primarch with a blow to the wrist, enough to divert his next effort, and then prepared to push home his attack. Guilliman recovered far faster than any mortal man and used the force of his opponent's blow to twist him around, the blade flashing out to meet his opponent. Torvis ducked and low and brought the hammer up, only to have it turned aside by the Primarch's free hand. Guilliman hefted the Marine high into the air, his fist still wrapped around the crackling head of the hammer, and then flung him, weapon and all, away into the nearest wall. Barolinus arrived by his side, his scarred face alight with the excitement of combat. He saw the punished heap that was Torvis and then looked to his Primarch, the light of blood hunger in his eyes. At his shoulder, the Cyber-Eagle Aegis flapped its vast wings, as if eager to rend the flesh of the Pronastart. My lord, what is your wish for this one? He asked, standing over the fallen Start. He stirs still. Shall his end be swift or punishing? Just kill it. Guilliman answered, his keen eyesight picking out the distant form of the fleeing chaplain. Berolinis nodded and looked to the warrior at his feet. He raised the hammer above his head, ready to strike the warrior's skull from his shoulders, and then paused. A glimmer of recognition passed over his features as he looked upon the face of the warrior he was about to kill. He knew the dark skin and harsh, angular features, and this was enough to stay his hand. "You," he uttered, his eyes widening. "I know you. Torvis." Torvis looked up into the face of his would-be killer and spat, a gesture of the absolute contempt in his heart. "I do not know you, Xenos serving filth. Kill me and be done with it. You do know me, Start." "Brr. I do not know you." Torvis hissed again, reaching for his own fallen weapon. "Whoever you are, disgust and revulsion has scoured you from my mind." Berolinis's expression hardened. The hammer in his hand descended and Torvis was no more. Part 145. Feral. Codian closed his eyes and offered up a prayer to his lost comrade. Torvis was dead, he knew that. Without a doubt. As brave and as skilled a warrior as he was, no mortal being could hope to survive an encounter with the Primarch. He soon reached the others, his dark mass passing between Gormat, Orekiel, and Shavak. "Chaplain. We had thought," Shavak began. "Torvis is gone. Unless we push ourselves, we are next. The Primarch has our scent and he will not stop until we are all dead." Up ahead the advance squads of the withdrawal unexpectedly parted down the center, flowing like twin rivers both left and right. He saw Liguor turn and shout something to him before the librarian followed the flow of the left-hand section, soon disappearing around the corner and out of sight. Within moments he came to the end of the wide alleyway and found himself staring into a wide abyss. The ground fell away sharply, and beyond the curved waist-high rockcrete wall a vast amphitheater stretched out into the distance, enveloping much of the environment before them. Whatever purpose this massive arena served was not apparently clear, but many symbols and icons of the Imperial Church littered the vast bowl. Devotional pamphlets fluttered past him and, as he bore on, he found his legs becoming entangled in brass and copper sensor stands. "Look!" he heard Grungy call, and followed the squat alien's outstretched finger. "We are closing in. The keep of your Emperor." Grungy was right. Beyond the vast amphitheater, towering over the buildings at the far side, the walls of the palace could be seen, much clearer now. They were close enough now to see the tiny pinprick flashes of light that were the guns of the defenders on the bulwarks, sending fiery death down onto the heads of the attacking unity. A newfound surge of hope coursed through him at the sight of this, and he found fresh reserves of energy within. The area covered by the arena was truly vast, but beyond it lay his destination. He soon realized that he was descending a long flight of stairs that continued to grow steeper with each step, and he found himself fighting to keep from sending bodies crashing down the steps before him. There were literally hundreds of identical staircases surrounding the arena, and the speed of their flight had forced entire squads apart. Men and women found themselves divided from friends and comrades as they were forced down ever-dividing intersections and arches sways by the rush. Within moments, a torrent of fleeing bodies spilled down the curving sides of the amphitheater, desperate to escape the coming unity. Codian and the others were perhaps halfway down the winding maze of steps when the first elements of the pursuing force caught up with them. Several speeding shapes roared over the lip of the highest point and dipped sharply towards the deserted center of the arena, the pilots of the small two-man skimmers obviously surprised by the sheerness of the sudden drop. Explosions rocked the wall seconds later as other, larger shapes soared into view, borne forth on plumes of bright fire. The bodies of Imperials tumbled into the precipice, or were thrown into it by the detonations. Codian looked on as the devilfish transports controlled their descent, slowly but surely drifting towards the greatest concentration of stairwells either side of the arena's entrance arch. He knew that, in moments, there would be enemy soldiers spilling out into the areas surrounding the exits, intent on setting up fire bases. They were fleeing straight into a trap, and there was nothing he or anyone else could do about it. The walls of the vast edifice shook as more and more transports came. Pulse fire raked the maze of stairs, sending clouds of dust and blood up into the air. Missiles lanced into entire squads and blew huge sections of wall away. Down on the ground, Kodian heard the first of the enemy's guns open up. He could see no other course of action open to him, and so, startling those around him, he threw himself to the side and vaulted over the handrail. Liguor. Grungy. With me. He hit the concaved rockcrete sides of the arena wall feet first and accelerated quickly into a stomach-churning descent, sparks raining from the soles of his boots. The walls were steep but inclined gradually enough for him to stay on his feet. Despite this, on his way down he saw many bodies tumbling to a painful and deadly fate, caught up in bone-shattering rolling descents. After several moments he hit the floor of the arena and fell into a roll, momentum dragging him from his feet. After several bone-wrenching turns he came up onto his feet and staggered off the last effects of his momentum in order to take stock of his situation. He had made it. Grungy and Liguor soon appeared by his side, tested and shaken but alive. Grungy had fared worst of all, his bared skin red with abrasions and scrapes gained in the descent. "Friends of yours, Stockleg?" the demiurge asked, throwing a nod out at the mobilizing enemy squads. Kodian followed his gaze and saw with a leaden heart that they weren't facing fire warriors but UVESA squads, humans formerly of the Imperial Guard who had given over their lives to the so-called greater good. "Kill them," the chaplain answered. "Kill them all, but spare the transports." Liguor nodded, understanding Kodian's orders immediately. That, the three warriors set off in the direction of the UVESA squads, intent on nothing but death. "Liguor, announce our intent," Kodian said, pushing himself to the limits of his physical ability. Moment later and a blinding wave of psychic power surged out ahead of them. Human faces turned to meet the oncoming rush of shimmering energy, and a heartbeat later those faces were scoured of flesh, the remaining bone clattering as it fell to the ground. The deadly tide washed over the devilfish that had carried the soldiers to their doom, but did little apart from rocket on its support legs. Within the space of a few seconds the first of the traitorous enemy squads was dead. Kodian watched as the demiurge was first into combat. He threw himself into a airborne roll and set down amongst them, scattering bodies with his arrival. He unfolded like a blade steel flower as he landed, his axe flashing through armor and flesh. Bodies fell apart at his touch, no match for the monomolecular edge of demiurge steel. Kodian and Liguor soon joined the fray, each start choosing his own UVESA squad. There were 3 such remaining squads at this side of the entrance, and with Grungy already carving bloody ruin through one of them, the entire ambush force on this side of the arena found itself under attack. The chaplain caught a fleeting glimpse of the librarian cutting through the soldiers before him, and then he was into his own target squad. He unleashed a storm of bolt rounds into the panicked men, and then brought the Dawnblade to bear, feeling the power of the weapon flood through his body. He caught a pulse round in the shoulder, the force of the blast throwing his sword arm back. His own momentum carried him into the treacherous soldiers and he felt bones break beneath his weight. He weathered an ineffectual blow to the chest with the butt of a pulse rifle and then smashed the head from the shoulders of his attacker. Another of the UVESA fired a round almost point blank at the back of Kodian's head. He lurched forward, the shot leaving a glowing white-hot ring an inch from his skull that soon dissipated. Whether or not the astonished woman had any idea of the forces that worked to keep the chaplain alive he had no idea, but it was more than apparent that she had not expected her opponent to shrug off such a blow so easily. She turned to run, and Kodian put a bolt round through her head and sent her sprawling on the ground. At that he turned swiftly and fired again, the shot near cutting the soldier retreating back up the open ramp of the devilfish in half. Last fire speared through the survivors of the UVESA squad around him as the first of the Imperial soldiers pushed their way out onto the floor of the arena. "You finish the pilot and then find me someone, anyone, who may be able to work these transports," he commanded, singling out the nearest friendly face. The rabbit nodded and thundered up the ramp, arming his shotgun as he disappeared into the interior of the devilfish. He checked quickly that Liguor and Grungy were faring well before turning his attention to the skies. Another piranha screamed by overhead, and he put a brace of bolt rounds into its left fin as it passed by, the shots punching their way into the engine before detonating. The craft spun away, its left flank ablaze, and he paid it no more heed. He turned his attention to the opposing side of the entrance just as a missile loosed from one of the Imperial teams twisted its way across the expanse and into the nearest devilfish, the shot striking the circular side hatch. The entire hatch caved in and the innards of the craft blew out, incinerating most of the GUVESA sheltering there. No more time, Prophet. He comes. The force of the bodiless voice caused his head to quake, and it was enough to cause him to sway on his feet. Even the presence seemed desperate, an emotion that coursed through him as if his own. And he shook himself, feeling anxiety well up within him. Grungy. Ligur. Finish this. We need to get as many as we can onto these transports, he began. Something urged him to glance up at the distant reaches of the stadium, the highest point of all. He looked on as a tiny shape smashed its way through the ruins of the wall and fell, rolling like a stone, down the steep incline. The Primarch was coming. Mobiliza! He cried, the call rising to a near scream of desperation. This was through no fear or panic for his own safety, but rather a product of his concern for the others under his wing. He was not about to board one of the transports and leave the others to their fate, no matter how important it was to survive this. The voice came again, urged into being by his own considerations. You will not make it, Prophet. He is here. Call for aid. Call now, and it will come. It will do no good. Codian cried, allowing his rage to boil to the surface at last. To anyone witnessing the exchange, it would seem for all the world that the chaplain raged at the wind itself. But he did not care. There is no one that can help us, Spirit. I have no way of calling for that help, even if there was. Trust your instincts. See the truth within. There is no truth. He shouted, frustration taking hold. This is done. I am done. Codian. He glanced around to see Ligur sprinting towards him. The look on the librarian's face told him that Ligur had caught at least a part of his rant, and despite the fact that he could hardly claim to be able to make sense of it, it was clear that he had sensed the essence of what was transpiring. We have to leave now, brother. I hear your thoughts and I know that we cannot contact the Alliance. I am far from powerful enough to breach the psychic defenses of the palace and call for aid. The alien transports are our only hope. There is one who will hear, Codian. One who will hear the power of the voice when even the mind is unable to penetrate. Call to him. Call to him, and speak these words. They hold no mystery for you. For you already know them. Visualize what you have seen with your own eyes and add that conviction to your call. He will come. Codian saw then in his mind what the presence meant, and slowly but surely, realization dawned upon him. He understood now. More than ever, he understood. At that he raised his head and took a deep breath, for he knew that he would need every ounce of power behind his voice if it was to carry far enough for the being to hear his call. At this distance, when even the power of the psychic mind could not carry a message across the vast distance between him and his goal, he knew that there was only one being on the planet that possessed the ability to pick up his request for aid. At that, he threw back his head, and cried louder than he had ever done in his life. Leman Russ. Hear me. Guilliman is here. Plus plus plus. Plus 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 the Eternity Wall Gate plus plus plus. Leman Russ charged into the enemy with absolute abandon, exhilarated beyond the point of ecstasy by the thrill of righteous combat. The wolves behind him were few, less than 100 in number. And yet they were the fortunate few, for they were present to fight at their Primarch's side. Sons of Fenris howled as they charged forward again and again, repelling attack after attack. Most of these warriors were old and grey of beard. In the Space Wolves, age brought with it almost legendary stubbornness and a fierce desire to follow tradition. Were it not for these few, these long fangs, there would have been no wolves present to receive the second coming of their Primarch. Gone were the fearsome heavy weapons the ancients of the chapter had brought with them. They fought with Russ now, and the presence of their Primarch was an invigorating and potent thing. Gone now were the grays and lines of age, banished by Russ's return. Each and every wolf on the battlefield was alive with vigor, forever changed and rejuvenated. Russ swung his mighty arms and felled swathes of Unity warriors with steel and fist, smashing aside that which did part beneath his blade. He was a force of nature, violent and unstoppable. Enemy warriors turned and ran from his fury, for to face him was to face the most implacable storm. Hostile fire broke against his armor, enveloping him, and yet he did not falter. Here, the fighting for the Eternity Wall Gate was thickest, and here was his place. Strike the heart and soul from them, for your Primarch and for the Imperium. Russ shouted, charging forth once again. Dominators were landing all around them, but the defense line did not falter. Russ himself swayed as one of the huge battle suits landed before him, throwing up debris and rubble dust as it did so. He hurled himself at the construct, faster than the powerful weapons systems of the suit could track him. He swung his frost fang low and struck the foot from the Dominator before darting beneath the toppling machine. It crashed forward to the floor, and as it fell he came around and thrust his screaming blade deep into the bulk of the crew compartment. He withdrew the blade and turned to his comrades, the fire in his blood shining behind his eyes. The Primarch thrust the frost fang up into the air and opened his mouth to speak. Every single hair on the back of his neck stood on end, causing the words to lodge in his throat. His pupils narrowed and his breathing slowed, as his superhuman body worked to block the many distractions assailing his other senses. He heard the voice, quiet and distant, carried on the blood-rich wind. He did not recognize it, but his interest was not attracted by the identity behind the call, but the words that were spoken. Guilliman, he whispered, drawing a great chest full of air through his flared nostrils. As he did so, the pupils of his eyes dilated. Guilliman. Hone who were present could have claimed witness to the great wolf's departure. He slammed his heels into the ground, cracking the surface of the road beneath his weight, and then was simply gone. Plus. Get them in. Codian shouted, gesturing towards the captured transports. Load them to capacity. And move out, as fast as you can. Several of the others were herding the Imperials into the idling skimmers under his direction. The craft swayed and shifted beneath the weight of those already inside. He waved frantically, urging the surrogate pilots to move off. Only once the devilfish transports finally began to rise did he dare to shift his gaze. The sight lodged itself in his brain, a snapshot frozen in the lingering eternity of a single moment by the sheer and terrible magnificence of it. Robert Guilliman thundered across the expanse towards him, his limbs pumping in furious motion. His sword flashed from left to right, slaughtering Kroot with every dismissive blow. The Primarch was unstoppable. Packs of the feral Kroot hounds leapt at him, only to shatter against his armor. Narlox and their riders scattered before him rather than fall in his wake. His wrath was an almost visible force, like a fire that burned about him. Codian quickly disarmed and holstered his pistol, realizing then just how useless it would be. He twisted around and set off for the nearest transport. Grungy hung from the near ramp, waving him on with the blood-slick head of his axe. The other captured skimmers were well underway now, thrusters flaring as they darted deeper into the city. The last one hovered a few feet off the ground, swaying beneath the backwash of its thrusters. He was too late. He drove his heels into the ground and spun to face his attacker, bringing the living Crozius up. Guilliman was upon him, large and looming in his presence. The Primarch did not meet him with steel, for if he had, Codian's life was doubtless have come to an end there and then. Instead, a fist surged out before him and struck the chaplain in the center of his breastplate. Powerful energies exploded across his armored form. Despite the vaunted protection afforded him, Codian felt the impact of the blow as an eruption of pain, not just localized to the area of contact but an all-encompassing agony. For a lingering second he felt weightless, disembodied, and then a violent impact at his back caused the sensation of his own master return, and with vicious effect. Alien steel buckled beneath his weight, driving the breath from his lungs. Time seemed to disjoint itself from reality as he struggled to his feet, too dazed and in pain to marvel at the fact that he was still alive. He could feel the protective influence of the Dawnblade's power coursing through him, reknitting bones and organs in the wake of the assault. He coughed up a mouthful of blood and felt it harden in his beard and around his mouth, the Laramon cells reacting with the air. He glanced up to see Grungy emerge from the interior of the craft, burning murder writ large across his face. Hands grabbed at him, trying desperately to pull him back inside, to no avail. He snarled and spat, roaring curses to those trying to stop him, and then leapt clear of the devilfish, his sights set firmly upon the advancing Primarch. Guilliman loomed into view, his sword raised above his head, ready to deal the killing blow. Grungy flung himself in the path of the Primarch, tumbling through the air, a tight, bladed ball of retribution. He unfurled and struck at Guilliman, his blow easily turned aside despite the Demiurge's inhuman speed. Still airborne and riding the force of the Primarch's counter, Grungy struck again 3 times in quick succession, turning end over end with a speed and skill no human could match. Guilliman turned every blow aside as he passed, his reactions almost instinctive. He paid the Demiurge no heed at all as he made for Codian, his target implacably acquired. "Leave!" Codian shouted, hammering his elbow into the side of the devilfish before meeting Guilliman. The skimmer's thrusters threw up dust around him as its engines rotated to 90 degrees, ready to propel the craft away from danger. "Fallen BD son of Ultramar. Your days are ended." The Primarch snarled, thrusting his blade out before him in an attempt to run the chaplain through. Codian's reactions exceeded the giant's every expectation. His arm flicked out and he deflected the strike, just enough to cause the glowing tip to slide past his armored midriff. The Dawnblade was still in its new extended state, and so he took the haft of the weapon in both hands, in time to turn aside another sweeping strike. Guilliman was massive, and impossible to keep at any safe distance. Codian backed away again and again, swinging and twisting his weapon in defense. Despite his anger, the Primarch's efforts were visibly nonchalant, as if his expectation to win the fight was so total that he refused to trouble himself with exertion. Grungy attacked from behind, leaping high so as to take the Primarch's head with his blade. Guilliman thrust his elbow back and sent the Demiurge tumbling away. "Finish it then," Codian uttered, defiance heavy in his voice. "Kill me. This war will grind on regardless. You and your Xenos masters will never enslave this world. You may destroy us, but we will never bend our knee to your cause. The blood that flows my veins is imperial, my Primarch. It is pure. No amount of murder or betrayal will ever purify the corruption that flows within you." "Blind fool," Guilliman answered. "You have no idea of what you speak. You cannot know the truth." "I know, Lord Guilliman. I know far more than you realize," the chaplain said, lowering his weapon slowly. "Now kill me, while you still have the chance. He is coming for you." Guilliman's patrician features tightened as he heard this. Mixture of distrust and suspicion dominated his expression as he rose slowly, the blade of his massive sword glinting in the light. He said nothing, for he had no time to speak. Something large and inhumanly fast slammed into his midriff, feet first, and sent him hurtling through the air. "Traitor!" Deep and thunderous voice roared, so loud Codian felt his skull vibrate and his eyes blur. Though the speeding giant's arrival had been so fast and sudden, so much so that any discernible features were still blurred and made hazy by the sheer speed at which he engaged Guilliman, Codian knew the identity of his savior well. Russ had come to save him. Part 146. Russ. Guilliman landed hard, his body thrown into a violent spin. He bounced twice, his armor ringing against the hard ground, and then came up onto his feet, velocity continuing to drag his mass along. Russ stayed on him all the way, his roaring sword hammering against Guilliman's weapon again and again, questing to find an opening. Despite the surprise of the attack, Guilliman put up an effective defense, parrying each attack with blinding speed. Russ was the shorter of the two superhuman warriors, but his physique and mass were vast, and his Strength showed. The segmented plates of his ancient armor rattled beneath the impact of each blow, and the long braids of hair that hung about his head danced like writhing serpents. The Primarchs fought on, and as the momentum of Russ's initial strike against Guilliman dissipated, the two combatants began to twist around one another in an almost graceful ballet, each Primarch probing for weak points in the other's defense. Russ fought on with animalistic fury, while Guilliman's every effort exuded grace and precision. Robert Guilliman, icon of the Ultramarines, brought so low in the eyes of the Emperor. Russ shouted, his face alive with the thrill of combat. Ha! Righteous Guilliman, a servant of Zeno's masters. How far you have fallen, brother. I pity you. Save your pity and your derision, Russ. Guilliman answered, pivoting and countering as he turned. On the spot. You are just another obstacle, another blind fool to educate. I will have your head before this day is done. Guilliman thrust his hands up and turned the blade of the sword towards the ground, blocking another strike. He lashed out with a foot and sent Russ tumbling backwards. The wolf fell onto his back and rolled back up onto his feet, far from stunned. The rest of the Tau forces were flooding into the arena now, and the battle with the surviving Kroot was well and truly joined. Piranhas circled the warring forces, adding their deadly firepower to the melee. Hammerhead tanks negotiated the narrow and winding access ways, and in some cases simply dropped into the vast bowl, thrusters upended so as to arrest their descent. Codian shook away the last vestiges of astonishment and cast around to see Grungy rising from his dazed position, bruised and bloodied with his confrontation with the Primarch. It looks as if we've found ourselves on the ST end of a strategic withdrawal. The Demiurge muttered, shaking out the aches and pains from his body as he jogged towards the chaplain. On the plus side, we seem to have acquired a good wealth of enemies to part from their lives. He reached the Astarte and slowed, taking a moment to savor the glorious battle around him, before looking to Codian. HNN. You seem to have a destiny, Codian. Go. I will keep them at bay as long as I can. I will not leave you behind, Demiurge. Codian answered. Grungy gave a curt, nasal snort at hearing this. You do not have much of a choice. Your man is a fine warrior, but I doubt he can hold an entire army back on his own for any good length of time. There is no time for a lengthy debate. You must leave, while you still can. I could not survive this with my honor intact if I did so. I could not spend the days of my life as the coward who ran from this fight. Grungy heard this and allowed a slow smile to creep across his face. Here bloody here. The clash of metal upon metal resounded through the arena as the two superhuman warriors battled. A storm of powerful blows raged between the two, the exchange sending sparks erupting from the furious melee. Russ wielded his frost fang with both hands and he used the weapon almost like a club, smashing it into Guilliman's defenses again and again. Guilliman kept the Primarch of the Space Wolves at arm's length, if only just, meeting every blow with unmatchable precision. This is a pointless conflict, Russ. Do you not see that? The Emperor is dead, murdered and betrayed by those you fight to defend. Can you not see the corruption all around you? The Imperium is sick. Russ shouldered past Guilliman's guard and barged him back, throwing him off balance long enough to bring his biting blade up to score a deep gouge across his brother's chest plate. Sparks flew as he swung his blade around and down, carving into Guilliman's shoulder guard. The Ultramarine Primarch cried out in pain and thrust the tip of Agisluz up, driving it into the thick armor of his breastplate. The two behemoths pushed each other back, separating their weapons from the anchor of their opponent's flesh. Russ's face darkened as he ran the rotating teeth of his blade past his keen nose, and then spat on the ground, disgust writ large across his face. You are not my brother. Your scent is wrong. It is corrupt as your heart, Guilliman. The blood that flows through your veins is weak and alien. What have they done to you? Made me strong, Russ, stronger than you can imagine. Guilliman answered. Despite the conviction he put into his words, his answer carried an accent of regret and sorrow. You are a puppet, nothing more. To kill you will be a mercy. The wolf snarled. Guilliman heard this. And frowned. Therein lies your weakness then, my brother. When I put an end to your life, there will be no mercy. From me. Codian looked on as the two Leviathans entered into combat once again, and knew then that he could not flee. He had called on Russ to come to their aid when he knew that no other would be able to answer his call. Russ was a mighty warrior, near invincible in combat, but that was no guarantee that he would survive this. The spirit within the blade had known Russ would not be able to resist the opportunity to face his fallen brother, and yet a part of him doubted that the presence cared little if anything for the wolf's fate. He could not allow Russ to fall because of him, no matter his own fate. They will make it, he said, his voice causing the demiurge to turn towards him. The others. They will make it. They will send warning of the coming armies. I trust them. Then what are we waiting for? Grungy answered, setting off in a bounding sprint towards the fight. What manner of warrior would wish to die of old age? Codian gave a long sigh, clutched the Dawnblade tightly in his hands, and advanced. Russ smashed his weapon into Guilliman's sword again and again, using sheer brute strength to punish his brother. Guilliman gritted his teeth and bore the brunt of the fearsome attack. His entire body shook beneath each blow, and the blade of Agislus glowed red beneath the relentless attack. Russ roared like an animal, rage and bloodlust consuming him. Such was his strength and ferocity that Guilliman could do nothing save for counter his attacks, his own efforts at survival leaving him with no opportunity to counter-attack. The Tau and the Kroot warred around them, the running battle swirling about the central combat, like water raging around a rock. A bright and thunderous explosion erupted close to them and, though the blast rocked both Primarchs, neither paid it any heed. A shadow fell over the two warriors, growing larger by the second, and Guilliman propelled himself back away from his brother's blade before sweeping his own up and out. Huge and bestial alien head bounced across the ground between them like a rock, and the mighty great Narlock's body crashed to the ground a heartbeat later, its intended attack put to an end. Russ leapt upon the beast's huge body and then jumped again, drawing his sword back, the tip of the blade aimed at Guilliman. He thrust his arm forward as he landed, so fast and powerful that he managed to score a deep, ragged gouge in the Primarch's arm. In the same instant Guilliman hammered his elbow into Russ's chest and sent the Primarch flying back, tearing the frost fang free of his arm in the process. Guilliman was quick to take the opportunity and followed his opponent, bring his sword to bear. Russ slammed into the body of the great Narlock and rolled. Guilliman buried his sword up to the hilt in the dead beast's flesh again and again as he hunted for his quarry, his efforts too late each time. Russ rolled clear of the mass of flesh and bone and rose, a glowering smile spreading across his face. As he spoke, he passed his blade from hand to hand, keeping Guilliman guessing on his next move. Almost, brother, almost. You have the skill and the strength, Guilliman, but not the edge. You do not have what it takes to beat me. No one does. We shall see. Guilliman replied, extending his sword towards his foe. Remember your boast as the light fades from your eyes, Russ. Codian's heart rate increased as he watched the two superhuman warriors clash once again, the prospect of entering that terrible confrontation a chilling thing. Part of him knew that the course of action he had undertaken would change things, and whatever would come of his decision to stay and fight, things would be forever changed. This will see you destroyed. The voice spoke to him then, as if reading his thoughts. So be it. I have played my part. I am satisfied. Now I must do my duty to honor, as is my way. He whispered, picking up the pace. Your part is far from done, Prophet. You will come to see that. Then you had better keep me from harm. He replied. You do not understand. There is another, one who hides the darkness within him behind a facade of familiarity. Beware the serpent in your midst, Codian. Even as he heard this he became aware of a speeding shape hurtling through the air towards him. His first reaction was to assume the thing to be some form of projectile intent on his destruction. and as such he raised his weapon and swatted at the dark shape. A piercing scream split the air as the dark bird narrowly avoided the blow, twisting in the air as it passed by the crackling weapon. Kodian followed the eagle's progress as it rose up into the air, shaken but unharmed, before turning his attention to the fight beyond. He caught a glimpse of Grungy barging his way through the warring mass before something else caught his eye, or rather stole his attention in a most spectacular fashion. The warrior skidded to a halt as he laid eyes on Kodian, his features slackening in disbelief. Despite the adornments of the figure, Kodian recognized his face immediately, that recognition coming to him like a slap in the face from the Emperor himself. Barolinus. Chaplain the Start uttered, his voice near stolen by disbelief. The shimmering hammer in his hand descended and the bloodlust drained from his face, a face that Kodian could not recall bearing quite so many ritual scars. Kodian. Is that you? Is that really you? Kodian felt his body relax as he looked upon Barolinus, quite unable to believe what his eyes were seeing. He had thought the young Astarte dead long ago, his imagination depicting a swift and fruitless death at the hands of the Tau fleet. To see him here in the flesh, standing before him as large as life, stole the chaplain's breath away. The sights and sounds of the battle faded away as Kodian looked upon his brother once again, the sight of Barolinus alive and well something he had never thought he would see again. Barolinus. I don't understand. The warrior advanced upon him and snatched his arm, embracing it in a warrior's handshake. Kodian found himself responding, the fingers of his own free hand wrapping themselves around the Ultramarine's vambrace. When the younger Start spoke he did so with a genuine delight in his voice. Chaplain, I cannot believe my eyes. I had thought I had thought you lost to us. You left, disappeared without a trace. Now I find you here, on Terra no less. This is a glorious day. Kodian released his grip and stepped back, fighting to make sense of the unexpected reunion. Barolinus gave a laugh of bewildered glee and mirrored his reaction, pointing the head of his hammer out at the warring Primarchs. My chaplain, can you believe what you see? See the miracle before you. Our Primarch is restored. He walks amongst us once more, a god in flesh returned to us. This is the day we could only dream of, brother Kodian, and it has come to pass. Guilliman has returned. Kodian felt the first pangs of caution as he heard this unwanted realization burgeoning its way into his mind. His astonishment at seeing the warrior again fading as the cold, hard realization of the darkness behind the reunion forced its way through. He shook his head slowly, a reaction that caused Barolinus's glee to fade. The Ultramarines' expression first turned to surprise, then bemusement, and finally darkened, though the herd behind his eyes remained. Barolinus, do you not see? We are at war with the Unity. We are at war with our Primarch. Guilliman is the enemy. The warrior visibly sagged as he heard this, his heart broken by Kodian's answer. He stepped back, swaying on his feet as if struggling to stay upright. This is our Primarch, chaplain. Rabut Guilliman, the father of us all. How can you deny that? He is sided with the enemy, and we cannot change that. Kodian answered, taking a step towards him. Barolinus, listen to me. This is madness. He would see the Imperium conquered, enslaved, beneath the yoke of the Xenos. They have corrupted him. The warrior's face darkened, a sneer of burning contempt twisting his features. The chaplain looked on in horror as the scars on young Marine's face seemed to darken and take on definition. Darkness flooded into his eyes, as if his pupils widened and spread. You are just like the others, he said, his voice taking on weight, becoming sibilant and dark. He raised the hammer and thrust it out in accusation at the chaplain. You are a chaplain of the Ultramarines. A master of sanctity. How can you preach the Imperial creed and yet denounce your own Primarch? I thought that you would have understood. The truth is exactly as Guilliman says. The Imperium is corrupt, and that corruption has taken you. Kodian saw then that the warrior was lost, not only to him but to the cause he had originally served. to the very meaning of his existence. In that single, lingering moment he saw how it was that the traitor legions had come to renounce their emperor all those thousands of years ago, turned to darkness by their primarchs. Not through evil, or a darkness of the soul, but love. Blind and unconditional love for their primarch. He understood the powerful emotions that could change Start's life, and steal away his reason. Barrow-Linus was still youthful and impressionable and, in the presence of the greatest individual ever to influence his life, he was lost to those emotions. "We are enemies then, you and I." Barrow-Linus spat, taking up a warrior's stance. Codian nodded slowly, a sadness passing over his face. "Yes, we are." The chaplain cried out then as he felt talons of steel rake the back of his head, tearing gouges through his flesh. Barrow-Linus bounded towards him as the bird swooped low over Codian's head and then ascended, passing over its master. Codian felt the Dawnblade writhe in his grasp as he closed on his former ally. The spirit within the alien weapon was agitated, disturbed by the presence of the warrior. Since coming into the possession of the ancient weapon, Codian had established an empathic connection with it. His own emotions had become closely linked with those of the mysterious presence within, and as a consequence he could feel the hatred and loathing emanating from the Dawnblade. He met Barrow-Linus with a thunderous clash of steel on steel, both mighty weapons sending flares of energy arcing out about them as they met. They stepped back from one another and Barrow-Linus raised his shield as Codian struck again, the potent device absorbing the power of the blow. He brought his hammer up and around and Codian rolled past the strike to swing the Dawnblade out. Barrow-Linus was quick, far swifter than Codian remembered. He twisted around and met the attack with his shield, his lower body following a second later. As the Dawnblade crashed into the storm shield, Barrow-Linus brought the hammer down and struck Codian's shoulder guard, crushing the protective plate into his shoulder. The chaplain staggered back, pain coursing through him. His rosary ooze had absorbed most of the power behind the blow, but the guard was buckled, a deep dent pushed into the thick ceramite. "Faster than you remember, chaplain," the warrior sneered, his dark eyes twinkling with exhilaration. Codian looked on in revulsion as the Start's tongue extended to lick his lips as if to savor the pain he had caused his former comrade. "You are nothing like I remember, Barrow-Linus. Whatever happened to you, the warrior I knew is gone. All I see is a traitor and an abomination. And I am the last thing you will see." Barrow-Linus snarled, driving forward. He swung the hammer and Codian pivoted as he countered the blow, using the spin to deliver a strike of his own, aimed low at the warrior's legs. Barrow-Linus thrust his shield down to counter the effort and jabbed the head of his hammer forward. Codian blocked this with his forearm and felt the impact throw him back, protective energies bursting around him. He jabbed the Dawnblade up, seeking to pass beneath the shield. Barrow-Linus brought the cruciform device down and stopped the attack, thrusting his shoulder out at the chaplain. The ringing impact shoved Codian back and he fought to maintain his balance as Barrow-Linus swept the hammer low, taking the chaplain's legs from under him. Codian fell onto his back and rolled, an instinctive and desperate move, and it was enough to save his life. The hammer crashed into the ground again and again, hunting for him, and as he rolled up and onto his feet he had to tile his upper body back to avoid the deadly return. The swing had been a mighty effort, the momentum of the hammer's wide arc pulling Barrow-Linus forward after it. Codian drove the haft of the Dawnblade forth and hammered it into his opponent's midriff with enough force to buckle the flexible material at the waist of his ancient armor. The chaplain wasted no time in taking advantage of the opportunity and swung his fist up, landing a bone-shattering blow upon the Start's jaw. Barrow-Linus arced back, his limbs flailing, and landed hard on the ground. Codian advanced then, his bloodlust up, intending to finish the fight. The Dawnblade writhed, eager to see the traitor destroyed. "We are done here," Codian hissed, raising the weapon two-handed above his head. "I will mourn you, Luram Barrow-Linus, as I have done since the day you left." Barrow-Linus smiled, spreading his arms wide as if to offer himself to the chaplain. "Kill me then, Codian. Kill me, and unleash all that I am." Your flesh will be my armor, and your soul my plaything. Kodian hesitated as he heard this. The conviction in the start's words was unmistakable and powerful, and though he could not understand what Barolinus meant, he could not ignore the warrior's threat. Kill me! Barolinus screamed, frustration causing his voice to break. The mirth drained from his expression to be replaced with a glowering hatred, and yet, for all the malicious emotion radiating from him, Kodian could see a pleading desperation behind the warrior's eyes. His life must not be ended. Not by you. The voice said, confirming his suspicions. Not while the evil lies so close to the surface. Kodian surged forward and stamped down on the warrior's face, driving his head into the ground. He lowered the head of his living Crozius and jabbed it into Barolinus's face. Bright energies flashed. And the Astarte fell limp, unconscious but alive. With that the chaplain looked back towards the battle raging about him, and knew in his heart that the next time they met, one of them would die. Part 147. Stormfront. Lord Solar Makarios held onto the handrail as his mighty ship shook around him. Human and Tau crew members flitted past his vision, and yet he ignored them, for they were as nothing to him. All that mattered was the image before him. A three-dimensional representation of the entire orbital battle stretched out before him. Ship icons on both sides blinked from green or blue to red, indicating that the ship in question had been destroyed. Hundreds of red icons dominated the image, and he felt the pressure of their presence building within him. Osarochar, the losses on your flank are unacceptable. Why are the enemy ships achieving broadside after broadside? If you do not have the capability to counter this, then get the damn drone fighters mobilized in a screen of tiger sharks launched to harry them. See this done, or I will see to it that your own auto-destruct sequences are initiated and blow you into the void myself. He continued to scan the broad image with unremitting persistence, searching for any signs of weakness or laxity in the Unity ships under his command. By his side, the tall and slender form of Koro Foryan, the IR cast commander of his fleets, lowered his stance so as to speak discreetly into his ear. My lord, we must be wary of these crude vessels. Many of them are of a configuration that simply does not exist within our fleet data logs. The war spheres in many of the Imperial vessels we can deal with efficiently, but without any knowledge regarding the weapons systems and capabilities of these unknown ships, we are greatly put at risk. They are ships, Foryan. Makarios spat, slamming his fist into the rail. Ships are susceptible to hostile fire, no matter their configuration. Yes, lord, but so are we. Foryan whispered. To place our fleets within range, we open ourselves up to danger. See here. He extended one spindly, elongated finger out at one of the blue icons, pointing in particular to the Tau text beneath. An Eldar vessel, if our readings are to be believed. This ship alone has accounted for no less than 8 of our vessels. We are unable to gauge its speed and maneuvering capabilities, for it seems to be of a class we have thus far never encountered, and by we, I mean the Tau race as a whole. We have thrown ships against her time and again, and yet she bests everyone. By rate of attrition alone. We cannot stand such tactics. I will tell you what we can and cannot stand. Makarios answered, the tone of his voice enough to cause the Tau to rise to his full height and step back. Every loss we sustain is a lesson. We test her with each attack, and as such we given an opportunity to gauge her. We have more than enough ships, Foryan. This. He thrust a finger out at the hazy ellipse before him, the curve of Terra herself dominating the bottom segment of the projection. This is our prize. Our goal. We must and we will conquer Terra. I do not care how many ships we lose to do so, for there will always be more. Would you be willing to defy Glorious on VA with overblown concern and protracted caution? Never, my lord. And neither would I. His will is supreme and overriding, Koro. This world is all that stands in the way of the Unity's total domination of this galaxy. Do you think VA cares for the loss of a few vessels? Have you forgotten the principal teachings of the Tau VA? I have not. I stand corrected, my lord. Forgive my lack of diligence. Macarius's expression softened as he heard this. He placed a hand upon the commander's arm. To show concern for loss of life is not a weakness, Coro. What you must concentrate on is the achievements that come from such loss. There will be time to mourn those lost to us once we have Terra brought to heel. There will be a lasting peace when the Unity's domination of this galaxy is complete, and it will be a peace never before known to these stars. We are creatures born of war. You and I. We have never known such a thing as peace, but that will change. This will be our legacy. To those who follow in our footsteps, human and Tau alike. Furion bowed curtly and made to leave, the impact of Macarius's words clear in his expression. The Lord Solar swept his cloak aside and turned his attention back to the raging battle, a renewed determination dominating his manner. Every light on the bridge flickered then, and it was more than enough to attract his attention. His eyes widened as he recognized the phenomenon immediately for what it was, and he stiffened, thrusting his arms down by his sides. The towering being stepped from the air and turned its burning eyes upon him. Macarius bowed his head, a gesture mirrored by every being present on the bridge with him. This in an honor, he whispered, dismissing the projection at his back with a wave of his hand. Unva regarded him with cold, emotionless eyes, allowing his presence to overwhelm all those around him before he spoke. You waste your time, Macarius. The ships of the enemy fleets are of no concern to us. The Lord Solar kept his head lowered, for fear of revealing the bemusement upon his face at hearing this. It took every ounce of effort and will he could muster to reply. Great forgive my ignorance, but I do not understand. I had thought the vessels of the crew to be of primary concern to your glorious fleets. Each loss we suffer is an affront to your ideals and your goal. The crew are as nothing. They do not matter. They seek only to divert us from our goal. Reactivate the display. Macarius frowned but did as the On commanded, nodding at the nearest member of his bridge crew. The projection came online once again and Unva turned his gaze upon it, his mere attention causing the display to shimmer and flicker. Select an enemy ship, Unva said. Choose, and learn how insignificant these crew are. Macarius hid his bewilderment well as he followed the order. He put no thought into the choice, and merely gestured to the Tau crew member behind him. The projection altered, enhancing greatly so as to show an area of space clear enough to define the ships engaged in battle there. One ship in particular dominated the screen, a Retribution class battleship identified by the data logs as the Might of Mjolnir. The vast warship's guns blazed as she speared her way through the Unity host, her prow lances sending searing blasts of energy out before her. Fighters and bombers erupted from her launch bays, sending clouds of glittering contrails rolling across her angular flank. Macarius looked to Unva in time to see his entire form quiver and grow hazy. An inner light built within him, soon bright enough to obscure every line and detail of his blazing shape. A flash of light from behind him attracted his attention then, and he cast around back towards the projection. 1,000 tiny explosions racked the Imperial vessel, erupting from launch bays and weapons turrets. Unity vessels scattered as the ship began to break apart, and as the engines at her rear began to glow, reaching critical mass with unbelievable speed, the projection shimmered and broke up, casting the bridge in an ominous gloom. Your power is humbling. Macarius gasped, falling to one knee before his master. Now you see just how insignificant the enemy is. Unva answered. I am able to crush the mightiest warship with but a thought, Macarius. I command the very stars themselves, so to command a vessel to tear itself apart is as nothing to me. I bow to your power and wisdom, On. My own efforts in pursuing the enemy to destruction pale to nothing before your majesty. You will go to aid Guilliman in his efforts to take the Imperial Palace. Unva said. Domination of this world's orbit is not of primary concern to me. Look beyond this bridge and see the truth of things. Unva swept a hand before him and the projection came back online once more. The orbital battle grew smaller and smaller as the display broadened in scope to reveal the surrounding void. Liquid color swam before them, churning and writhing as if the firmament itself boiled. Makarios saw this and his face slackened. The enemy call upon the foul energies of the warp to aid them in their fight. They seek to summon a storm to destroy us, for they cannot do so by honorable might alone. I am ordering every available fighting force down into the surface of the planet, to ensure that our martial strength remains total. You will lead these forces, Makarios. The Lord Solar bowed his head at the honor bestowed upon him. Your wish is my command, Un. I will leave immediately. Makarios, know that I have ordered the release of the Shadismanta. The world below is soon to turn into its night cycle, and it is time for them to wreak a bloody vengeance upon the defiant guardians of Terra. Genitor Primus Fabius will lead them in their assault of the palace. Ensure that he and his armies are escorted safely to their location, and then join Guilliman in the destruction of our enemy. It shall be done, my Un. The Eternity Wall Gate Nothing. Damn it, there is no sign of him. Manas turned to Calgar, concern writ large across his silvered features. The aging wolves by his side scanned the distant battle again and again, sniffing the air as they did so as if seeking to hunt down the location of their Primarch by scent alone. Did they see him leave? Calgar asked, his own augmetic voice heavy with concern. Russ's lust for battle is legendary, but surely even he would not carve a path deep into the enemy forces on his own. He would not leave his wolves behind. Not unless he had a good reason. Manus answered. One of the Long Fangs joined the Primarch and the War Master. He swept his long pelt aside and pointed the head of his axe out at the raging battle. He has a scent, that is all we know. We tried to follow but we were beaten back by the press. I warned Russ to keep his head. Manus snarled, his massive fists tightening. We cannot afford to lose him to folly. Russ was called, said a dark and powerful voice from behind the gathering. LLIs turned to see Ka standing there, his gaze set firmly on the distant melee. As he spoke, the tone of his voice was such that it seemed even he only realized the truth behind what he said even as he was saying it. I see the truth now. The one called Guilliman is abroad here. Russ has answered the challenge of his presence. Guilliman. Manus uttered, his own choler rising at the mention of his fallen brother. Guilliman is here. How far away, Xenos? Russ cannot. The towering giant's voice died away then, not of his own choosing but rather as a result of the sudden and powerful wind that tore at those present. He cast around to look upon Ka, a reaction mirrored by Calgar and his ultramarines, in time to see the mysterious alien's outline blossom and grow. The shadows around him twisted into spiraling tendrils of thorn-covered darkness, all questing forth in the same direction. Ka raised his arms up by his sides and the limbs unraveled, becoming a black, greasy mist caught on the powerful breeze. What is happening? The War Master called, the rising gale so powerful no as to cause even his mighty metal form to sway and groan. Your defenders are about to make a terrible mistake, and I must prevent that. Ka answered, and with that, he was gone. Russ smashed Guilliman's sword aside and swung his opposing fist, the blow hammering into the ultramarine Primarch's chest plate. Guilliman staggered back but kicked out as he did so, the armored top of his boot catching Russ in the ribs. Both giants staggered beneath the blow of their contemporary, and for a moment, the fight was over. Russ was the first to recover. He twisted on the spot, riding the force of the blow, and then sprang forward like a hunting beast, his chain blade snarling for Guilliman's blood. Guilliman righted himself and countered, driving forward to meet the charge. He deflected the attack and answered with his own effort, a lunge that Russ only just managed to drive away from his neck. Better. Russ called, ducking and swaying back as his opponent kept up the advantage. But far from enough, Rabut. Some of my better blood claws have put up more of a fight. Your alien innards slow you down, Guilliman, and the sludge that flows through your veins leaves you sluggish and wanting. How can you even stand to draw your next breath? Guilliman gave no answer. He seemed to sense that there would be no retort suitable and so simply gritted his teeth and switched hands, keeping the tip of his blade pointed at Russ at all times. Without warning, his entire outline blurred. Russ's eyes widened as he took in the sight, and even though his instincts were as far beyond a mortal man's as could be possible, he was still too slow to react to the Primarch's sudden acceleration. Guilliman drove his blade through Russ's chest plate, the keen energized metal stopping only when the eagle-winged guard rang against the ancient metal of his armor. Russ's eyes widened as they fell to the hilt of the sword, and the armored hand wrapped around it. Sluggish and wanting, Guilliman uttered, a victorious smile creeping across his face. It would seem that you have misjudged me, Russ. The Space Wolf Primarch's pupils narrowed almost to nothing then, his features twisting into a feral snarl of shuddering rage. You should not have done that, son of Makraj. He exploded in a maelstrom of sudden action, his sword arm swinging up and around to bring the blade crashing into Guilliman's forearm. The limb parted beneath a welter of blood and Guilliman staggered back, arterial fluids spraying across his opponent's armor. Russ unleashed an air-splitting howl of rage, so loud and potent that it caused human, Tau and Kroot alike to fall to their knees. He howled again and again, his cries resonating throughout the vast arena and beyond as he tore into Guilliman, his blade drawing a great ragged rent through his chest plate. Guilliman snatched at Russ's sword arm and held his wrist tight, preventing the wolf from attacking. Russ used his free hand to pummel the ultramarine Primarch's face again and again, and within moments a spray of thick blood preceded each blow. Guilliman ducked low then, avoiding the next blow. He tucked his shoulders under Russ's waist and, still holding his wrist, hoisted the warrior into the air. Russ turned end over end as Guilliman threw him over and into the ground, the impact turning the hard surface of the arena floor into dust. Russ found himself momentarily pinned, Gisilus's blade driven both through him and deep into the ground by the impact. Guilliman wasted no time in pressing home the advantage as he stomped his foot into the wolf's arm again and again, each impact driving his vambrace further out of its original shape until he finally released his grip on his chain blade. Guilliman kicked the snarling blade away, and then landed a bone-shattering kick to the wolf's face. Russ's head snapped to the side, blood bursting from his mouth. The father of the wolves was far from done. He snatched at Guilliman's other leg and pulled, toppling the blue-armored behemoth. As he crashed to the ground, Russ struggled to rise, but could not, for the blade he was impaled upon was thrust too deep into the rockcrete below him. He snatched at the plated arm still holding the hilt of the sword fast and tore the limb free. With his other hand he grabbed the hilt and pulled as far as his arm would extend, drawing the still crackling blade a good way from his body. It was enough, just. Freed of his prone position, he threw his legs up and then forward, propelling his upper body up and finding his feet once again. He cast Guilliman's severed arm aside and pulled Agislus from his chest, baring his fangs in pain as he did so. He took the blade of the sword in his other hand and brought it down on his knee. Agislus shattered amid a blinding flash of overloading energy. Bright forks of power arced around his arms, turning his armor black, but he did not flinch. He cast the broken and smoldering pieces of the blade to the ground as Guilliman rose to meet him. Glimmer of disbelief passed over the ultramarine Primarch's face, but he managed to dispel his rage swiftly. You will pay for this, he said, raising the ruined stump of his arm. Upon hearing this, Russ raised his arms in challenge. Then I urge you, collect that debt. Let us finish this. Guilliman started towards his brother, the ground shaking beneath his feet. Russ brought his arms down, ready to meet the giant's advance, when a sudden storm of bright fire raked across his armor. Russ shuddered, blood flashing to glittering mist around him. He staggered back, pulse fire lancing by him and tearing up the ground at his feet. Stay your weapons! Guilliman roared, his face shaking with rage. He cast around, his finger extended accusingly before him. Tau warriors skidded to a halt all around him, terrified by the Primarch's rage. The Unity forces had managed to push their way further into the arena, driving the Kroot back in the process. None of the warriors had expected to incur Guilliman's wrath at attacking his foe. He is mine, and I will face him with honor. New York warrior who raises arms against him will sign the death sentence of himself and his entire squad. This BD is mine alone to kill. A slow clapping sound grabbed his attention and he looked back to Russ. Bleeding from a score of smoldering impact wounds, the wolf staggered forward, applauding his foe. How noble! Perhaps I have misjudged you, Rabut. No matter the Tau's poisonous influence, it would seem that you still possess your legendary arrogance. There may be more of my brother left in there than I had first suspected. At that, a wicked smile formed upon his lips. I would ask you to return the applause, Rabut, but you would need 2 hands to do so. Guilliman unleashed a bellow of unfettered rage and charged, his legendary aloofness at last shattered by the wolf's taunts. The 2 Primarchs met once more, trading blows powerful enough to shake the foundations of the tallest buildings of the city. That's it. Feed upon your rage, brother. Let it consume you. Russ cried, weathered the most fearsome punishment with unnatural good humor. Every blow Guilliman landed dented or cracked his armor, and yet the gleeful smile upon his face remained. Despite being at a disadvantage, Guilliman laid into Russ with all the force of an orbital strike, his every blow warping his brother's ancient armor. He drove his knee up into Russ's groin and then landed a shattering uppercut to his chin, the force of the strike throwing Russ high into the air. Russ came down hard on the nose of an advancing hammerhead. His weight and the force of the impact caused the crew compartment to cave in like paper and the skimmer crashed nose first into the ground. Its engines cut out at the destruction of its pilot and the tank fell still. Guilliman was upon him faster than he was able to haul himself clear of the twisted metal. He leapt upon the downed craft and slammed his boot into Russ's face, driving him deeper into the ruined metal. Even as Russ struggled to free himself, Guilliman sunk his fingers into the thick metal of the tank's vast turret rail cannon and slammed it down upon the wolf again and again, the unnatural manipulation of the weapon and its mount causing the turret to pop free of its ring amid a shower of sparks and splintering armor plate. Russ kicked out and Guilliman staggered back, the huge weapon still fast in his grip. The turret slid free with a groan and crashed down on top of the wolf, driving him yet further into the twisted wreckage. The entire hammerhead bucked and shuddered, enough to cause Guilliman to leap clear of its convulsing hull. A moment later Russ burst from the innards of the craft, the thick hull parting before him as if nothing. He leapt over the sloping nose and drove his shoulder into Guilliman, forcing his foe back. His brother brought the gun around and smashed the turret into Russ. The wolf raised both arms and the domed construct shattered around him, sending debris scattering far and wide. The impact did nothing to slow the wolf. He carried on into his opponent and drove home his attack. The first blow hammered into Guilliman's chest. The second and third were stomach blows, doubling the Primarch over. Russ grabbed Guilliman's shoulders and drove his knee into him again and again. He followed with a vicious elbow into Guilliman's back and then he stepped back, landing a horizontal punch that spun his foe around. Guilliman pivoted several times before crashing into the ground. Russ hauled him up onto his feet and threw him into the immobilized hammerhead, sending him crashing through the hull and out through the other side. The wolf followed, clearing the down craft in a single leap to land before his foe. He tore the fin-mounted drone there free and cast it at Guilliman, the velocity of the hurl causing it to shatter as it impacted against the Primarch's armor. Pure hatred radiated from Guilliman's eyes as Russ punched him again and again, driving him to his knees. You are dead, Rabut. You were dead the moment you came to this world. You were dead the moment to bend your knee to the bloody Tau. He dug his fingers into the ultramarine Primarch's gorget and hauled him up, hammering blows into his face again and again. Blood poured from Guilliman's ruined face as Russ pulled him close. I broke Magnus upon my knee on Prospero, and I will do the same to you. Beneath his mask of glistening crimson, Guilliman smiled. His black eyes turned to the skies and he raised his one remaining hand up to point beyond the wolf's back. It does not matter, Russ. The defenders of the palace are finished. The Viscount come. Russ frowned and raised his eyes to the sky. Far above, below the churning mass of warp energy, the atmosphere burned. Hundreds of thousands of tiny fires ignited the atmosphere, as if the stars themselves were descending upon Terra. You will not survive the coming night, Russ. I vow that. The distraction was enough. Russ looked back to Guilliman in time to see his fist ascending. The blow sent the wolf flying back, freeing his opponent in the process. Guilliman hauled himself to his feet and kept up the advantage. He drew his arm back and threw a punch powerful enough to shatter the planet's crust. Russ spun away through the air, turning end over end. He twisted away over the heads of the warring factions and landed a good way from Guilliman. The ultramarine Primarch rose, his dark eyes alive with anticipation. Praise be to the wisdom of Unva, he whispered, watching as the thousands of dropships burned their way through the atmosphere. Night was already drawing in, the distant sun only partially visible above the tallest of the buildings surrounding him. He looked to Russ once more, searching through the roiling throng until he picked out his brother, rising at the center of a large clearing. Run, Russ. Flee, like the dog you are. Look to the skies and see the coming of Terra's end. Codian skidded to a halt as Russ's powerful form rose before him, a mountain of punished armor, parting the sea of bodies. Guilliman's strident voice cut through the melee beyond. He heard the Primarch's threat and gazed up to see the darkening atmosphere ablaze. The knowledge inside him boiled to the surface of his mind, and he saw the truth, saw what was coming for them. The enemy. The Visceon. The Unity's army of night. No. We are not ready for this, he whispered. Grungy came to a standstill beside him, his axe blade bloodied and glistening. He followed the chaplain's gaze and cast a disinterested eye upon the descending craft. HNN. More meat for the grinder. The Tau promised us Ragnarok, and it would seem they are good to their word. I feel it in my bones, Codian. This is the soil that I will stain with my blood. I will die here. On Terra. There is fight yet left in all of us, small one. Both of them turned at the sound of the deep, feral voice. Russ's bestial eyes blazed through the mask of blood and filth he wore, alight and alive with a boundless determination. You. He said, raising a hand slowly in the chaplain's direction. You were the one that called to me. Yes, Primarch. I knew only you would hear my call. Guilliman is beyond salvation, even I can see that. Russ looked Codian up and down, scrutinizing the markings of his armor. As he did so, his expression softened, and he looked upon Codian with a visible empathy. To see your Primarch returned, only to face you as an enemy must cause an ache in your heart, greater than any mortal wound. Despite this, you have fought against him to safeguard this world and the legacy it represents. The Imperium is all, Primarch. Without it we are nothing. Our race is nothing. My allegiance's end always will be to the Emperor, above all others. So you must be the prophet. Russ answered, turning back to face his nemesis once more. Go. Fast as you can. Take flight and head back to the Imperial lines. I have a message I need you to deliver. Codian heard this and bowed his head. Of course, Lord Russ. What shall I say? You will find Ferrus Manus, the father of the Iron Hands, and your War Master Calgar ahead at the Eternity Wall Gate. Tell them of what transpired here. Tell them of Guilliman, but most important of all, tell them of what is to come. Codian looked up as he heard this, intrigue and confusion at war within his expression. To come. It is time. Russ replied. It is the wolf time. Codian nodded and, wasting no more time, turned on his heel and broke into a swift, ever-accelerating sprint. Grungy followed close behind, his craggy face deeply lined with puzzlement. Though he did not ask the question, he could see in Codian's eyes that the chaplain understood, and that was enough for him. Behind them, a long, rending howl split the air. Part 148. Return of the Wolves. Robert Guilliman gritted his teeth as the terrible sound rolled across the arena, the design and construction of the stadium only adding to its acoustic effects. He knew immediately that this was no mortal howl, no mere cry of rage and bloodlust. His vision hazed at the sound, and his pulse quickened. His senses were second only to Russ upon this field of battle, and he felt the charge in the air, the hairs at the base of his neck standing on end. Bodies writhed around him, rendered insensible by the terrible, unending howl. Even though he was fully able to appreciate the agonies the mortal creatures around him were experiencing, he made his way over to the nearest prone squad and hauled a fire warrior effortlessly to his feet. Stand. Stand, damn you. We have a war to win. He let go of the warrior and the Tau fell in a heap, rolling around in pain. Guilliman fought the effects of his own disorientation and rose to his full height, anger bringing a fresh glow to his face. Rise, or I swear I will kill you all myself. With the authority of Unva himself, I command you. Rise. And meet this threat. A few mere seconds brought only frustration to the Primarch. He spat a curse and searched about him, scanning the surrounding carnage with absolute scrutiny. After a few moments he made towards a certain spot and stooped low to retrieve something from the ground. It was his own forearm, still encased within its ceramite shell. Agisluz lay broken by his feet, its blade shattered and smoldering. He looked upon the ruined sword and felt his gorge rising, the blood in his veins hot and surging. Not only had Russ violated his flesh, but he had destroyed the most potent symbol of his home world. He still possessed Agisluz, the legacy of his adopted father, Kolnir of Makraj. You will pay, wolf. He uttered, spears of hatred lancing from his eyes to assail his brother Primarch. This is far from over. Leman Russ strode transcendent across the battlefield, his arms spread wide. He possessed no weapon, for Guilliman had seen to that, but such was his menace and presence that, at that moment, he needed no such armaments. The bestial cry issued from his lips still, its pitch and strength unchanging. It was as if Russ himself was not responsible for the noise, for it was an almost supernatural thing, transcending every imagined boundary or level one could imagine. The very air of the arena shimmered and hazed, as if a stifling heat rose from the ancient flags. He turned his nose up as a part of him recognized the presence of what was coming. Dark powers were building, and they were of the warp. Russ's appearance had turned his unstoppable advance and slaughter of the Kroot into a rout, though he would be loath to admit this much to anyone. The wolf had taken his arm, destroyed his proudest weapon and punished him greatly, and now this. Lord Guilliman. His ward Barolinus staggered from the melee to stand by his side, battered and bloodied from his own exertions with the enemy. A master of emotions as he was, Guilliman could near taste the shame radiating from his loyal servant, though he soon decided that this was not the time to press answers from Barolinus. The warrior slowed as he noticed the grievous damage done to his Primarch and his jaw fell slack in disbelief. My Primarch, this cannot be. He let his storm shield and hammer fall to the floor as he raised his hands to the bloodied stump that was left of Guilliman's arm, his fingers quivering. His was the manner of a man who had chanced upon his greatest prize or possession, lain in ruin at his feet. How? Guilliman cast aside his ward's incredulity and gestured around him, presenting the ominous phenomenon. We must regroup, Barolinus. We have pushed far enough. What good is this spearhead if we drive our advance too far without adequate support? Look to the skies. The Shad is mont to come. Barolinus cast but a fleeting glance up at the fiery firmament before once again turning his attention to the unexplainable carnage about them. He fought the pain in his own expression as he observed the scene, clearly as affected by the wolf's terrible cries as any. Let me have him, my lord. I swear that I will kill him for this affront. Guilliman shook his head at this, and his expression told the Astarte that he would brook no argument. Russ is mine alone to slay. I will make him pay for what he has done to me. The wolf came to a standstill and raised his arms high. He tilted his head back and howled one final, lingering time. All those who had known Russ would attest to the fact that he was never known to possess any psychic abilities, and this was true, yet there was an unmistakable resonance to the sound, an undeniable charge. He was done. He lowered his gaze and glanced about him, seeing the prone and debilitated Unity warriors as if for the first time. With casual disdain he began to walk amongst them, kicking and stamping as he went, ending lives with contempt. Deprived of his beloved weapon, he stopped low and retrieved a pulse rifle. He examined quizzically before inserting his finger into the trigger loop, his actions consequently snapping the long rifle in two. He cast the broken pieces aside and continued to sift, retrieving guns and blades, none of which were any use to him. He plucked a pulse grenade from the belt of a fallen UVESA and pulled the pin. Further away from him the Unity forces were consolidating, the effects of his crippling cry lessened by the distance. He cast the grenade far, like a stone, sending it into the midst of the recovering forces. He cast around as there was a flash of emerging energy behind him, his keen ears detecting the low, rumbling boom that accompanied it. A bright circle of rich crimson force unfurled like an iris, sending forks of etheric lightning out before it as it emerged. An armored figure stepped from the shimmering depths of the rend and out onto the floor of the arena. He bore a mighty rune staff, the symbols upon it and those to match them on his armor glowing as if white hot. He was a feral-looking warrior, clad in the armor and furs of a wolf, with a great shaggy black beard that only added to this appearance. A high-pitched screech split the air and Russ looked on as a dark avian shape swooped low over his head, so close he felt the breeze at its passing blow through his hair. He shifted so as to stand before the warrior as he strode forward, a look of wonderment spreading across his craggy face. "Lord Russ, it is you," the rune priest uttered, the same wonder thick in his deep voice. "After all these years, after so many fruitless quests, we have found you. It is I, rune priest. Your Primarch has returned." The warrior slowed as he reached Russ and fell to one knee, his head bowed. Though his face was hidden, the emotion in his voice as he spoke was powerful. "T last. T long last. I am your servant, my lord, humble and in awe. I am your faithful son." Russ smiled as he heard this and laid a hand upon the rune priest's shoulder. "I know this. Were my eyes blind to your visage and my ears deaf to your claims, my heart would still know this to be true. Tell me your name, son of Fenris." "I am Enjal, my lord, the Stormcaller." "Then rise, Enjal, and know that the time has at last come. This is the wolf time." Enjal rose as commanded, his features still fraught with disbelief. He gathered his staff to his chest and cast around, back towards the bright portal. "This is the wolf time," he called, his strident voice carrying across the battlefield. "Let the armies of Fenris hear this and gather. At last, the final call to war is upon us. No more shall the wolves wander the unknown wastelands of the Empyrean, for we have found our prize." One by one, similar warp gates blinked into being all around them, saturating the expanse of the arena within moments. Armored figures exited the anomalies, silhouetted against the brightness of the gates, to pour into the vast space. "We have found him. We have found our Primarch," the Stormcaller cried, spreading his arms wide. Russ took in the incredible sight with silent wonder, his heart thrilling at the scene. He looked on as a horde of baying, bestial creatures loped through one of the distant gates and bounded towards him, howling in exultation. Though the monsters had once clearly been Astaroths, they were now far removed from that origin, although this fact presented little if nothing to cause him concern. "My lord. It has been an age." Russ tensed as he heard the voice. His pupils narrowed and his nostrils expanded, both instinctively. The voice was barely recognizable, if at all. It was heavy and mechanical, every syllable tainted with the acoustic feedback of mechanical generation. The scent too was all wrong. It was industrial and sour, a pungent odor of machine oil, adamantium, and energy discharge, as far removed from organic as could be. None of this mattered. He knew him. He would know him anywhere, under any circumstance. "Bjorn," Russ uttered, turning slowly to regard the towering mass of metal. The venerable dreadnought descended before him, its vast form creaking and groaning beneath the effort of lowering itself into a kneeling position. Bjorn, Russ said again, striking the ancient warrior's arm with enough force to rock his vast armored bulk. I would know you anywhere, young one. What manner of folly is this? Trying to measure up to your Primarch. He took in the vastness of the armored dreadnought shell, amusement glittering in his eyes. Bjorn took a step back and cycled his vast assault claw, as if to flaunt his power to the Primarch. This shell has served me well, my lord. For near 16 millennia your wolves have sought you. I made a vow on the day you left us, a vow that I would not rest, and never would I fall, until we stood by your side once more. More and more rune priests poured from the gateways, called to the gathering by the stormcallers. Psychic cry. Yet more of the lupin creatures Russ had seen emerged, roving ahead of the other Asteroutes like packs of attack dogs, driven to near insanity by the scent of their Primarch. Bike engines growled as squads of mounted wolves roared into the arena, throwing up dust and debris as they carved through the retreating warriors of the Unity. Tanks and other rumbling war machines pushed their way clear of the gates, battered and patched in several places but otherwise battle-ready. It was a glorious sight, and one that caused Russ's chest to swell with pride. He turned slowly on his heel to take in the sight, as hundreds upon hundreds of warriors descended upon him. One figure in particular pushed his way through the crowd, and the masses parted to allow him to do so. Russ regarded the wolf, his eyes narrowing. The warrior was old, that much was clear by his thick graying mane and beard. He wore his hair in a braided topknot that flowed down over his shoulders and chest. He reached the Primarch and bowed his head. Great Wolf, he began, reaching around to pluck something from his back. My name is Ragnar Blackmane, and I stand before you today to fulfill an ancient prophecy. I am here to return this. He extended a silver dogmatic hand and offered the Primarch a long, slender object wrapped in faded animal leather. Russ took it, his eyes glimmering with recognition for the item despite its hidden nature. The spear of Russ is yours once again, my Primarch. With that he rose once again and took a step back, joining the ring of ancient rune priests that had come to stand before Russ. The Primarch took in the sight around him and slowly nodded his approval at the gathering. My sons, one and all, I know of your quest. I know the lengths you have gone to in your search for me. I know of all the trials and horrors you have endured in the millennia since my departure, and everything you have done has made me proud. Hear me now, for everything I have to say is of the utmost importance. Much has been kept from you all, and for that I am truly sorry, but my actions were necessary. Had I not left your side, none of you would be standing here today. You have searched the warp for me for many thousands of years. And the ordeals you have suffered there in that blasted realm were great, but these quests have kept you safe, my sons, for they have kept you beyond the attentions of evils greater than any of you could ever imagine. Thick silence descended across the throng at hearing the Primarch's words. Sea of faces regarded Russ, every one suspended in confusion. The Primarch saw this and raised his mighty arms, beckoning his warriors closer. Gather, my wolves, and hear my tale, so that every son of Fenris can understand what has come to pass, and what is yet to come. Let me tell you of the Emperor of Man, of Magnus the Red, and of the darkness of the end of days. Only then will you truly understand why I left you, what I am to ask of you now, and why everything you thought you knew was a lie. Gilliman ignored the buffeting winds that tore at his hair as he watched the descent of the Orca. The landing craft came to rest upon the road, throwing loose debris up around it as it alighted. Within moments the side ramp descended and Fabius strode out onto the road to meet with his commander, surrounded by a small contingent of human and Tau menials. As he left the open iris, the mechanical limbs at his back unfurled. As he closed the space between them his eyes fell to the severed limb in Gilliman's hand, his expression tightening with concern at the sight. May the enemy be damned, my lord, for this infraction. No matter, I will fix this for you. The limb will be attached once more, as good as new. His voice trailed away then, and a look of dark anticipation shone in his eyes. No, better. Come, my lord. He beckoned to the waiting craft, its interior modified to his own personal specifications. Guilliman stayed where he was, displeasure writ large across his face. Better? I am not one of your experiments, Fabius. We have a war to win, and with the coming of nightfall I intend to lead the attack upon the palace personally. A simple reattachment of the limb will suffice. Fabius heard this and slowly folded his hands behind his back. He met Berolinis's gaze for a moment. And then, ignoring the warrior's scowl of displeasure, turned his attention back to the Primarch. Commander, forgive me, but it pains me to see this. He gestured at the severed arm, his oversized features twisting into a mask of exaggerated pain. I would do all I could to ensure that such an outrage is not to be repeated. That one of the enemy was even capable of assaulting your flesh so callously, sets my blood on fire. It pains me to stand by and do nothing, when I know that I am capable of assisting you so much. If you would but let me, I can work such wonders into you. I can enhance all that you are, my lord, if only you would allow me. You are the greatest among us without compare. I promise that I can make you greater than any Primarch ever was. He bunched his fists as he continued, as if to further accent the passion behind his words. I can make you faster, stronger. I can expand your senses, Lord, beyond anything you could ever dream of. I could work the influence of the ethereals themselves into your flesh, if you would desire it. As great as your presence is, I could give you the power to command every Tau in the unity to obey your word, or suffer a pain worse than death. Imagine it. You are a Primarch, wrought by the Emperor's own hand. I have the ability to make you more than even that. Guilliman did not answer immediately. His features remained immobile as he absorbed the apothecary's words. Only after a lingering silence did he reply. Reattach the arm, Fabius, and then I will allow you to convince me further. Plus. Codian charged through the small square, grungy hot at his heels. He negotiated a scattering of mighty raised plinths, the statues above so vast that, were they to topple they would crush the entire square. He threw himself beneath a massive arch, the structure cracked and punished by the enemy bombardments, and sprinted through the shadowy gloom. Within minutes he reached the far side and slowed, his ears detecting the sound of engines ahead. A moment later several shapes hove into view, slowing to a halt before him as they did so. Harsh spotlights bore down upon him, and bolters and shotguns threw out a collective staccato clack as they were armed and thrust in his direction. Without a firearm of his own, Codian raised the dawn blade up, in readiness to defend his life. Dalo Codian. Voice barked, part questioning, part demanding. I am Codian. He answered, lowering his weapon. Despite the brightness of the lights he could see beyond him clearly, thanks to his Astarte senses. The figures shifted as they dismounted their rumbling bikes and put them to their stands. Grungy caught up with him and came to a standstill at his side, his face twisted in suspicion. The Astarte scouts jogged to meet him, lowering their weapons as he did so. The sergeant of the small squad checked every angle of their surroundings before lowering his own bolt pistol and bowing his head in greeting. Chaplain, War Master Calgar sent us forth to find you. Your comrades are alive and well, safe behind Imperial lines. We have been instructed to retrieve you and bring you back, for he wishes an audience. Codian felt relief upon hearing that the others had made it to safety. Grungy slapped the flat of his axe against Codian's leg, a harsh grin splitting his lips. HNN. Look, I say. The War Master sends a message, Chaplain. He was most insistent that you receive it. Go on. He wishes that the past be forgotten, and that the two of you would meet as allies. He understands. What transpired between the two of you was misunderstood. Codian thought back to the last time he saw Calgar. The Grey Knights had very nearly come close to killing them all as heretics, all thanks to the scheming of a creature he now knew to be one of the dark and terrible star gods known as the Citan. This being had attempted to see him alienated from all those he could consider allies, and up to now, he had thought that plan to have worked. It would seem that his former chapter master was not as blind to the truth as he had originally thought. He gestured for Grungy to climb onto the back of one of the bikes. At this, the scout sergeant offered his own mount to the chaplain, humbled enough to accept the pillion seat. "Then we must ride, and hard," Codian said. "For there is storm coming, and the War Master needs to know the truth." Part 149. The Ultimate Gate, the God, and the Dragon. Smash M. Grind M into the floor. The vast abomination that was Omog Drak literally lumbered through the barricade as if it were constructed of no more than rotting flakboard. He wore an immense suit of armor, the design part Orc, part Tau in origin. The suit was a variant of the battle suits worn by the Tau, greatly altered to accommodate the Orcs. Huge frame. A brace of twin-linked plasma cannons adorned each iridium-plated arms that ended in vast, energy-sheathed pulse claws. These charged claws were capable of shearing through the hull of a land raider and so made short work of both the fortifications and the unfortunate men and women in their way. Omog Drak swept his arms from left to right, demolishing the surrounding construction with languid ease. The cannons at his arms unleashed random orbs of searing energy out into the spaces beyond the breach. The soldiers there were packed tightly together and in great numbers, ready to repel the invaders. Plasma fire speared through bodies clad in armor that was not equipped to turn such powerful energies aside. The gray-skinned Leviathan lifted his head and bellowed, the sound a guttural, bone-quaking noise. Orcs poured through the breach around him, a torrent of thirst and hatred none of the defenders could have been fully prepared for. From their distant vantage points, heavy-caliber weapons spat death out into the grey orc horde, breaking bodies and sending cyan blood blossoming out into the air. High-energy blasts cut bodies in half by the score, reaping a bloody toll amongst the alien warriors, but Omog Drak's orcs were numbered in their tens of thousands, and such casualties barely registered. Omog Drak led the charge into the inner defense ring, orcs spreading out around him to smash into the Imperial defenders. "Kill 'em all, boys. For the Unin, for the greater good." He lowered his head and smashed through the next rockcrete barricade, a choking cloud of grey dust enveloping him. Hazy azure plasma punched through the smog to assail the startled defenders, burning through all it touched. He was a monster, an unstoppable abomination, born of the most savage qualities of the orcs and the most potent genetic skills of the Tau. A brutish, towering killing machine. He skidded to a halt as the reeling defenders scattered around him, gleefully scything bodies down with each swing of his arms. His black eyes shone with murderous delight. Loss and bolter rounds struck his armored form, only to glance harmlessly off the near-impregnable shell. The Grey Orc commander's personalized battlesuit armor was a unique piece, and no expense had been spared in its design. Mounted on each shoulder was an air-bursting fragmentation launcher, specialized weapons available only to those in command. The cycling launchers activated at his unspoken command, each whirring into a dizzying revolution, as it released a cloud of miniature bomblets out into the charged air. The tiny grenades exploded as they came within range of the unfortunate defenders, sending fire and razor-sharp fragments of metal scything through them. Bodies literally burst apart before the deadly storm, arms and legs spinning away from the flashing, booming melee. The Grey Orc commander swayed and turned on his axis, spraying the surrounding area with the small but deadly munitions. Moments later found the next towering rockcrete wall and charged. Once again, determined to bore his way to the very heart of the defenses. He charged headlong into the wall and then staggered back, unprepared for the barricade's resistance. His efforts had driven a huge crater into the thick bulwark, and yet it still held firm, despite the punishment. He shook his head and blinked, dust billowing from his grey skull. Slowly his expression of anger died, to be replaced with one of mounting anger at his lack of success. He dug his heels into the ground and charged again, unleashing a rising roar of unfettered rage. Once again he thundered into the barricade, driving ever deeper into the solid rockcrete. Huge chunks of the walls clanged against his armor, dislodged by his brutal attempts, yet despite this, he was still not through. Angered by this continued denial, he raised his arms and fired, pummeling holes through the remaining wall. Within moments the assault had weakened the barricade enough. He deactivated the cannons and drew both his arms back as far as the restrictive armor would allow. A final, earth-shattering blow brought him through the last of the obstruction, and he stomped forward, ready to begin the slaughter anew. The blow twisted him violently, so powerful it lifted him off his feet and sent him crashing into the wall. Protective energies coruscated around him as he fought to right himself, struggling with the cumbersome weight and stifling bulk of his armor. It took the Grey Orc commander several seconds to haul himself to his feet, during which time he had expected who or whatever has assaulted him to continue the attack. He brought himself up and around, roaring his anger out into the winding maze of defense walls. And his eyes fell upon the hulking figure before him. "You will not take this gate so easily, Xenos," deep and rumbling voice uttered. The dark-skinned face of Fukin radiated utter contempt, though despite this, it was an unmatchable sense of honor that stayed the mighty hammer at his shoulder from descending to finish the task. He extended a hand out towards the breach as the space flooded with armored Asteroutes. Omog Drak took in the sobering sight in silence and no small amount of bewilderment. His every nerve burned with the desire of war, for all that he could see before him was glorious combat. He could barely contain his own desires, and it took all his will not to advance upon the waiting warriors and give himself up to the oblivion of wanton conflict. "Go back," Fukin said. "You have proved your mettle enough. Turn away and go back to your lines, beast, or stay and die. I would kill you with but a single blow, and you know it. You will not pass this point alive, I swear it. I offer you this one chance, warrior to warrior. Take it." Wall of bolter barrels surrounded him, and yet Omogrik smiled. Orcs held no fear of death. And this was one trait the Tau could not have bred out of them if they tried. "Rattled my jaw good, dat did. I'll take dat hammer off ya when I kill ya, and I'll crack me plenty Imperial leads with it. Dead or alive, you wouldn't have the strength to pry it from my fingers, orc. Now, you will turn back, or I will send you back. Make your choice." The burning look in his opponent's eyes told Fukin that the orc commander never had any real choice. He would never back down from a challenge, for such an action was against his very nature. Both huge claws snapped closed and then open again, the sound of the double impact resounding through the rockcrete trenches. It was enough of an answer. Fukin drove forward and swung the hammer once, smashing aside the descending claw. He returned and swung down, driving Omog Drak's second vast arm down into the ground, the force of the blow causing the orc to lurch forward. His third strike was a mighty effort, a single-handed uppercut blow that propelled his foe high into the air, his hulking form twisting as he ascended. The fourth was a mountain breaker. Omog Drak descended rapidly, his sheer weight bringing him down fast. Fukin snatched the hammer in both hands and struck the falling Xenos with such violence that he spun away out of sight, back towards the enemy lines. He leapt up onto the top of the wall without effort and watched as the alien flew through the air, passing over the heads of man and orc alike as he fell back towards the enemy mass, shedding armor plates and hydraulic fluids as he went. No more than a speck upon landing, the orc thrashed and roared, his crackling claws tearing apart those of his own kind foolish enough to find themselves within his vicinity as he rose. The blow did not kill him. Fukin glanced at the Astarte at his side, the warrior still in the final stages of hauling himself up onto the thick vertical slab. No. Such a creature is built to withstand far worse. That was merely a tap, start. Warning blow. I believe it will consider itself chastised. The Marine bowed his head at hearing this, and though his expression was hidden, his tone and manner were unmistakable, tinged with confusion and doubt. Fukin lowered his hammer and fixed his gaze upon the warrior. When he spoke, there was a manner in his voice and a light in his eyes that spoke of a deep and dark wisdom, a wisdom only a Primarch could possess. Some enemies are more useful alive than dead. Survive this, warrior, and you will come to understand my actions. Fukin The Primarch cast his gaze around in time to see both Korux and Khan approaching. The Khan vaulted his way towards Fukin, leaping the scattered dragon's teeth and razor wire like an athlete. Korux simply descended, clearing every obstacle before him on twin columns of fire. Both Primarches came before him at the same time, their arrival scattering the Astaroths and Guard in the immediate vicinity. It was Korux who spoke first. Landing atop the wall beside him, the Primarch of the Raven Guard stared out across the expanse to where the hulking orc commander had already renewed his attack efforts, picking out the enemy creature with effortless, hawk-like ease. "That is Omog Drak?" he asked, extending a vicious, shimmering claw towards the distant figure. Fukin nodded. At that, Korux scowled. "It turns my stomach that we must allow such filth to live," he hissed, his vast black frame animated with an eagerness to slay the Xenos. "Mine also, brother, but we cannot ignore what we know, and we cannot deny the will of our Emperor." The Khan ascended by him, tulwar in hand. He took in the vastness of the enemy forces before him, and then turned to Fukin. "Do you feel it, brother? Storm is coming. Our father is truly one now with the warp, and his rage shall be second to none. The enemy forces have vastly increased within the last few hours. I have seen ships fall from the skies like rain, many thousands of them," Fukin said. "Night is approaching fast," the Khan observed, looking to the setting sun on the distant horizon. "This has to be more than a coincidence. They will attack when darkness falls. We must be ready for them. Kodian's gaze remained fixed to the passing space between the monolithic structures of the Imperial city. The bikes were running at full speed now, the collective roar of the engines echoing through the man-made canyons around them. Another gap flashed by, and just for a second he caught sight of the roiling sea of bodies and armor. It was no more than a snapshot picture, an image frozen in time. Bright explosions and energy discharges flashed and popped, and for a moment the sounds of the battle were magnified by space, and then it was all gone. They were close now. Close enough to see the enemy. Here before the palace the buildings were at their tallest and most magnificent. All that separated him from the bulk of the Unity forces assailing the Eternity Wall Gate was this single line of structures. The bikes roared along the deserted street, past burning Imperial tanks and ruined Tau sentry turrets. Despite the speed at which they were traveling, the stench of death was still heady in the air. Bodies were scattered all about them, burned or bloated in death. Kodian made a silent vow to avenge each and every dead Imperial soldier and citizen his eyes found there. He heard the sergeant speak into his Vox unit behind him, and suddenly the direction of the lead bike altered. He reacted immediately, bringing his own mount around sharply in order to follow the lead bike. They entered a tight alleyway, scattering debris as they passed. Up ahead the lead bike illuminated the way as the alley darkened. He saw figures shifting up ahead, several of them more scouts, this time clad in dark, shifting shadows that disappeared as their chameleon cloaks were swept aside. The alleyway ended abruptly, and he saw that a large circular hatch set into the wall was being hauled open. One by one the bikes roared into the dark depths of the culvert system. As he passed by, Kodian caught a glimpse of many scouts, some wielding heavy bolters and missile launchers, others barely visible, their sniper rifles covering every possible angle of attack. "Seal it behind them," he heard someone call. Then, only utter darkness. Armored bodies parted before him as he climbed the ever-rising steps of the dais. Despite the battle raging beyond them, the crowds were ominously silent. The scout sergeant bowed respectfully and then turned to leave, his mission ended. The rest of the scouts peeled away to leave Kodian and Grungy to ascend the last few steps towards the figures awaiting them. Calgar's now familiar dreadnought bulk filled most of the space before him. He cast his gaze around the gathering to take in the faces around him. He recognized the War Master's companions, Ultramarines one and all, and nodded in greeting to Uriel Ventress. The Ancient responded with a nod of his own, a quiet smile of brotherhood turning the edges of his lips up. Umbras and the others were also present, although they were further beyond Calgar and his warriors. Kodian regarded his comrades across the distance, pleased to see them alive and well. Another figure dominated the group, and unlike the others, this one was not of the ultramarines. Eyes of liquid sliver regarded his approach, eyes that bore into him with the gaze of one far from human, or even Astarte. Kodian had never laid eyes on Ferrus Manus in his life, nor even seen a likeness of his visage, and yet he knew without doubt the hulking warrior before him to be the Primarch of the Iron Hands. His mighty arms and smooth head were wrought of what appeared to be a living metal, as malleable as skin and yet suggestive of a strength and power to surpass any weapon ever fashioned. Manus did not speak as Kodian and Grungy approached, though he did regard the squad Zenos with a look of unhidden displeasure. Grungy met that look with indifference, untroubled by the vast warrior's attentions. "War Master," Kodian said, banging his fist respectfully upon his breastplate. "Brother Kodian. It pleases me to see you alive and well here on Terra. It pleases me more so to see that my error in judgment did not deprive this alliance of an essential component." Kodian raised a hand in response to this. "Recriminations are unnecessary, Lord Calgar. We all know the truth of things now, and those that sought to undo our efforts here were unsuccessful. All that matters is that we stand united against the coming darkness. That is why I am here." This Calgar gestured towards the small group of Kodian's comrades. "Much has already been explained, Chaplain. Your colleagues braved much to stand here today, and for that I commend them. Were it not for the efforts of another, they would have perished to our own guns." As if to take that as a cue, a dark shape ghosted into the meeting. Smoke seeped from the air and solidified, within seconds taking on a tall, slender humanoid shape. "Ka," Kodian uttered, genuinely surprised at the presence of the Old One. The ancient alien bowed his head slowly. "Kodian, you have done well to get this far, but I am afraid that the message you carry has already been conveyed. I have revealed the whereabouts of Russ, and the coming of the Wulfen." Kodian heard this and felt only relief. At that he looked to the skies, ready to speak once again. He did not have to. "They know of what is to come, Kodian. I sense the burgeoning powers of the warp as they build. It is almost time for the armies of life to gather. The War Master and the Primarch understand what is coming, and that they must be sure to accommodate our allies. The coming night will bring much pain and war to these walls, but we will be ready for it. We will weather it, together." Ka cast his gaze across the gathering, his huge eyes seizing every face there and holding it, ensuring that what he had to say next would not be ignored or misheard. "Hear me, and understand all that I say. Even now, our true enemies gather their forces and strength, ready for the final push that will see them either victorious or denied for all time. The Unity is in the final stages of committing its full strength to taking this palace. These are vital times. Soon, with the full power of the Unity before these gates, the enemy will finally choose to reveal their true natures to us. They will come, the four abominations, and they will feast. There will be much bloodshed, and many millions of lives will be lost as we deny them, but deny them we must. All of you here present must understand what is to come, for if there is no unity amongst us, there can be no victory. To tell you that the rules of war that have dominated your existence between these stars have changed is a simple thing. What I have to tell you must be absorbed, and my instructions must be followed, otherwise we are lost. You are not the Emperor, Zenos," Manus uttered, his patience finally rupturing. He swung one mighty arm forward and pointed an accusing finger at Ka with undisguised menace. "Your allegiances matter not. Do not presume to take command of these." "There," Ka answered, the mere presence of his voice enough to suffocate Manus's own. He extended a hand and unfurled his long fingers, as if to present something to the angered Primarch. "Zenos, you spit the word from your mouth with such hatred, Ferrus Manus. You know more than any other here what secrets lurk beneath the foundations of your own existence, and yet you still struggle to accept the truth. I do not stand here before you today as Lord and Master. I do not seek the domination of your kind or your imperium. The truth is my gift to you. Accept it, or deny it and succumb. I care little for how unpalatable you find this situation. You were made for this day. You exist for it, every one of you. This is a war for existence, not for domination or territory. Life itself hangs in the balance, and life must answer the call to war. Life will answer that call, I promise you that. Manus said nothing, nor Calgar. The silence of the two champions was a powerful thing, and if any others present there had considered an argumentative response, they dare not voice it. It was the War Master who finally spoke in answer. Then help us understand, Ka. You ask us to forget everything we know, to disregard the very boundaries that have defined our imperium, the same boundaries our emperor set himself all those thousands of years ago. Such boundaries were necessary, Calgar, though none of your kind could have known the truth. With that he gestured to the chaplain, and a sea of eyes turned to look upon him. Ka is right. He began, stepping forward so as to stand at the center of the gathering. He took a moment to meet the faces around him, and felt his fingers tighten unbidden around the hilt of his ancient weapon. War Master. Primarch. Starts, brothers of the guard. Every one of us here exists because of war. It is as Ka says, we were made for it. War is in our blood. Conflict dominates everything we are. Who amongst you knows anything but war? He raised a hand and pivoted slowly, inviting any of those present to argue their case. The only response he gained was a continued silence. This is no accident, no coincidence. Do any of you fail to understand that? There is only war. There has only ever been war. This is a legacy from a time when dark and thirsting abominations sought to devour all life, those same abominations that even now mass to see their terrible plans come to fruition. We are creatures of war, born to fight and kill. Do you think that it is but a circumstance of fate that this galaxy has never known peace? This galaxy cannot know peace, not ever, not until we complete the racial quest that each and every one of us was born to take, whether we knew it or not. You make no sense, Chaplain. Manus growled, his massive fists bunching in frustration. No? Then take existence itself as proof of my claims, Primarch. Were you yourself not brought into existence to fight and to kill and to conquer, all in the name of war? I exist because of the Emperor. Manus raged, his voice rising into a ringing, sonorous scream of utter rage. I exist because of the vision of one man, one great and mighty man, the greatest being to have ever lived. It was the Emperor who forged the Primarches. It was the Emperor who brought the peoples of mankind together under one banner. He dragged us screaming from the edge of the abyss, from the very precipice of racial oblivion, and he did so for one reason. He believed humanity to be the ultimate race, the masters of the stars. The Emperor had a vision, yes. Codian answered, his voice calm in contrast with the Primarch's burning anger. It was a plan of unity. As a race we were forged to conquer and dominate. Forged to be strong, unbreakable. Forged to be ready. For what? Calgar asked. That Codian motioned around him. For this. For here and now. If Ka has yet told you anything of our true enemy, then you will know that they are ageless, millennial. The C'tan are set to rise again, indeed, some have already risen. What good would a galaxy of peace and harmony have done us when they return to the harvest? None. The Emperor knew the truth. He knew that we had to be strong, be ready to face the coming darkness. The only way he could ensure that was through the foundation of the Imperium, and the unending conflict such a vast vision would bring. He forged us all, Primarch, as a race. He tempered and blooded us, and in doing so he ensured that we had a chance at least of survival, of success. He shifted then towards the edge of the gathering, to where the sounds of the battle echoed through the darkening air. We are not the only race to live by war. The races of the galaxy share a common connection. All the orcs know is war, for they are ruled by it perhaps more so than any other. There is no harmony to be found out there. There is no peace, for peace is not allowed to exist. There is only war. What happens to us, then, if we win? Kodian looked to Grungy, his eyebrows raised. The demiurge stood before him, his neck craned so as to look upon the chaplain. Grungy. It is a simple question, Longshank. If all we exist for is to fight, then what happens to us if we find victory here? How do we exist? How do we continue to function? Can there be any true victory for us, if all we are destined to do is tear each other apart? Kodian looked to Ka as he heard this, his expression troubled. That, I cannot answer. There is only one amongst us who can. Whether the rest of them knew the whole truth behind the primordial alien he did not know, and if Ka had revealed as much to them he did nothing to betray that confirmation. Instead, he simply folded his hands back inside the ever-shifting shadows of his form, and answered. Your enemy is, and always was the C'tan. Everything, existence itself, is a product of this coming apocalypse. What lies beyond victory, should we find it here, is something even I cannot answer. And so we stand here, united and ready. Kodian said then, drawing his living Crozius from its strap. In a gesture of readiness. Manus and the others all looked to Ka, expectation writ large across their faces. The alien bathed in the collective attention of the throng for long moments, and then withdrew his hands from within his cloak of shadows once more. He gestured out at the surrounding skies and the waiting throng as he spoke, each and every movement slow and deliberate. The pieces fall into place, both revealed and hidden. Light and darkness shifts. In order to influence the skeins of fate, one must have an absolute knowledge of the cause and probability of each and every action. That knowledge must be manipulated meticulously so that optimum results are achieved. We have but one slender chance of winning this war, and so we cannot allow for any mistakes or errors in judgment. Answer the question. Manus growled, his indomitable impatience flaring to the surface once more. Ka bowed his head as if to placate the Primarch's temper. Listen, Ferrus Manus. Listen to your heart as you listen to my words, and you will see that you already have your answer. The balance of power has shifted now, enough so that we are able to put the next stages of our war into action. Listen, understand, and see. He stepped back, his hands rising. His outstretched fingers grew hazy, the living darkness there expanding. The air before the gathered warriors shimmering and became tangible, a phenomenon disconcerting enough to cause those closest to move back away from the ominous occurrence. Soon the hazy ring had driven the Imperials far enough back that it had created an ample space, several meters in diameter. Shouts and cries rose up in protest to Ka's actions as, though he had not harmed anyone, the use of his warp-based powers began to anger and worry those closest to him. Kodian looked across the divide to see the Iron Hands Primarch's livid face, his silver eyes glowing with mounting anger. Manus pushed against the influence of the Xenos but could not manipulate it. For all his vaunted strength. Just when it seemed he would finally lose his temper, it came. A burst of glittering, multi-hued light exploded into being, blinding the unprepared hordes. At the same time Ka's brusque psychic influence died away and his actions were quickly forgotten in the wake of this new occurrence. Kodian lowered his hands, his enhanced vision soon growing accustomed to the light. He looked to the phenomenon before him and found he could see what appeared to be a being at the center of the sensory maelstrom, albeit mostly obscured by the dazzling display. He felt the fingers of someone's hand wrap themselves around his arm and turned. Chivok was standing by his side, his eyes wide with fear and wonder. As he spoke, his mouth quivered. Sigarak. It is he, Kodian. The god of the webway. Within moments the glittering phenomenon coalesced, solidifying and sharpening into thousands of shimmering diamond fragments. These fragments swirled around in a dizzying tornado of light and sound, assailing the senses of all those present. It was a chorus like that of the sound of a million angels, and a light brighter than the fiercest sun. It was all this and more, and yet it was contained. Bearable, if only just. It was magnificent. It was terrifying. The being did not speak, nor indeed attempt to communicate with any of those present in any way. It simply extended one shimmering arm and spread its fingers wide. Ka urged the others back and then retreated from the area himself, a glowing portal of swirling energy unfolding where he had stood moments before. The blinding being simply disappeared then, its bright body rolling in on itself until no more than a blazing speck of light, before disappearing completely. Sigarak was gone, but the portal remained. What is this? The Primarch demanded, the first amongst them to gather his senses and speak up. Ka's indubitable influence faded away in time for him to barge through the dissipating energies and stand before the gate, his every mannerism demanding answers. He comes. Ka whispered. The Dragon. Part 150. Stone Cold, Heart of Fire. The Lions GTE+++. Chausseur la Kir la Montrecaon watched the burning skies descend, and smiled. The Shadis Monta. Unva has finally released them. He turned to regard the collective of Chausseur commanders before him, each one a vast, hulking brute. In his own right. Soon the night will come, and then we will increase our push upon this gate. We will take it before the dawn breaks. Is this understood? One by one, the warriors bowed their heads in servile agreement. Commander, field reports confirm that Makarios has landed in the city beyond the Eternity Wall gate. His forces moved to bolster those of the Kaigula Il Porui. One of the warriors said. Then we must ensure that we are the first to break this fastness. Okirla replied. That glory must be ours. Omog Drak has many thousands of warriors at his disposal, and Okorstla is due to find herself bolstered by both Gilliman and Makarios. I will not be found wanting. He shouldered through the other commanders, his sights set upon the towering gateway still some distance away. He drew his pulse staff from his shoulder and activated its charged tip, the resultant burst of energy illuminating his simian bulk. If we are to take the glory for this, then we must act now. We will receive our share of the Shadis Monta, but I refuse to wait for the coming of the night. We will pave the way for them. Ovars Han, mobiliza the Vespid. And want them ready on your command. O Giad, I want every available null drone we have on the field now. If our intelligence is correct, then we are to encounter many powerful psychers here, and I will not have our armies fall to their filthy influence. Ovar Ch. The sniper teams are yours. OHNOLDAR, likewise the broadside teams. Omidrek, the bulk of the remaining forces are your to direct. I need no more than a smoke screen, a diversion. Push them hard, but not so hard that we lose more than we can afford. The other commanders parted as they followed his orders, not a single question or objection passing their lips. Okirla himself shouldered his way forward, his pulse staff braced in its firing position and ready for use. LL units, prepare to initiate the Montkadur al-Daki. For victory and for the Tau VA. Up ahead, the guns of the defense line continued to pound the attacking Tau forces. Hidden by the bulk of the Unity forces, Okirla's charge would not be noticed until it was too late. Minutes later, the tanks and the squads assailing the defenses suddenly began to peel away, motivated by some internal command. A sea of sniper drones surged through the retreating armies towards the spread of fortifications beneath the mighty gate, and by the time the first of the defenders had noticed what was happening, the first shots had been fired. Railgun shells scythed through those unfortunate enough to find themselves standing atop the 4-meter-high siege walls. Gun emplacements were targeted with murderous efficiency, 3 or 4 shells at a time, turning the armored guns into piles of smoldering scrap. Such was the power of the deadly shells that a few even managed to punch through the thick segments of the defense wall. Soldiers were dragged screaming after them, sucked into the vortex created by their extreme hypervelocity. Behind the drones, the larger guns of the broadsides opened up amid a rolling thunder of seismic booms. The cannons wielded by these lumbering battle suits were far more powerful than the smaller rifles of the sniper drones. These were shells that were fully capable of punching clean through a land raider. Great sections of the walls flashed to choking dust beneath the impacts of the rail cannon shots. Behind the defenses, Earthshaker emplacements groaned as they imploded, gutted by the unstoppable blasts. Okir Law thrilled to see such destruction amongst the enemy, his pace quickening. He knew that such success would be short-lived no matter how powerful the attack was, for that success sat firmly on a foundation of shock and surprise. The enemy would adapt, that much was inevitable. This was all about attrition, and the gaining of ground. Nd, when Chasseur la Kir la Montrecaon gained ground, he ensured that it was his to keep. Vespid, forward! He cried. Behind him, the air suddenly became thick with the drone of thousands of vibrating wing cases. Vespid rose up into the air, so thick that the swarms blocked out the towering buildings behind them. The aliens surged over the heads of the others and descended upon the survivors in the raised trench, a storm surge of hatred and determination. Neutron radiation flooded through the defenders, killing soldier and marine alike. By the time the first Vespid foot touched down behind the barricades, the first defense line was a broken carpet of ruin and death. The insectoid aliens dispatched those still alive with cold and emotionless efficiency, before turning their attention towards the guns of the second defense line. Vespid, retreat! Okir Law ordered moments later, reaching the nearest breach. Ordered, the aliens took to the skies once more, their work done. Many fell around the Chasseur and his advancing forces, as the Imperial guns exacted a bloody retribution, but he knew that such losses were inevitable. It was done. Through blood and determination they had taken the first line. Sniper drones clustered around every breach, picking off targets with ruthless efficiency. Okir Law's marine hunters charged up to the punished walls and fell against the thick rockcrete, weapons at the ready. Many of the warriors were armed specifically for the occasion, the many weapons harnesses fastened about their bodies heavy with pulse grenades and other similar devices. The line of grenadiers hurled their explosive payloads over the wall, while those gathered around the various breaches poured pulse fire out into the spaces beyond. Okir Law himself stood crouched before the wall, keeping an exacting eye upon the progress of his forces. I want the null drones brought up to maximum range. We have gained an advantage here, and I intend to keep it. I want marker lights up here now. Give those skyrays as many targets as they can handle. Hammerheads and broadsides to maximum range. Give me breaches for my Chasseur to utilize, and I will give you all victory. On cue, crimson marker light beams stabbed through the billowing dust clouds all around him, hunting for the skyrays targets. Partially visible through the dust, the glowing magnetic contrails of rail cannon fire speared by. A shot hit the wall nearby him with a dull crump, close enough for him to feel the pull of its passage. A second later the rockcrete there lost its integrity, first sagging inwards, the surface cracking, and then finally coming apart. Huge chunks were dragged after the projectile, the dust created by the immense impact spiraling after the shell. He waited a moment more, until he was sure that the worst of the shell's effects had dissipated, and then threw himself towards the newly formed gap. He snapped off a salvo of wild rounds through the breach as more of his warriors joined him, adding their own efforts to the attack. One of the Chasseur, a particularly eager individual, leapt through the gap, his pulse staff blazing. A brace of thunderous booms cut the air and the warrior jerked back, his armored torso a mess of blood and flesh. Armored shapes loomed out of the dust, dark and foreboding. Bolters roared and more of Okir Law's hunters fell, bloodied and broken. The Chasseur surged forward and swung his staff, cleaving the first pair of arms from their parent body, bolter and all. His second swing drove the glowing head of the staff through the marine's chest and the victim fell back, boiling blood cascading from the wound. Okir Law pulled his weapon free and unleashed a salvo of point-blank rounds into the other marines, burning through ceramite and flesh. Another lunge punched through the faceplate of a marine and he fell back then, wary enough to preserve his own life. Chasseur, retreat to safety, he ordered, throwing himself back. The warriors under his command followed the order immediately and without question, peeling away from the open spaces and heading back into the temporary safety of the walls. Satisfied that his order had been carried out, Okir Law turned his attention to the dead start at his feet. The long, syringe-like extraction blade extended from his forearm and he thrust it into the Marine's neck, driving it with absolute precision between the supple ribs of the ceiling rings. He drew his head back and allowed himself a moment's relish at the absorption of the Marine's genocide, his own physiology invigorated by its absorption. The taste of genocide was pure ecstasy to him, as it was to all his kind. His every sense sharpened, focused by the assimilation of the genetic material. Time seemed to slow around him as he became ultra-aware, alert to every sensory experience available. He could hear each individual order issued by the nearest Imperial commanders. He could smell the rank odor of perspiration that the enemy hordes exuded. He could sense the panic and the desperation of his enemies, and he thrilled at this. Shoskaon, take your sustenance where you can and then retreat back to safety. Broadsides and hammerheads, press home the attack. This trench is ours. Vespid, ready to advance once again on my command. The Eternity Wall Gate Codian looked on as the ancient and immortal being stepped from the swirling depths of the warp gate and he tensed, sensing a similar apprehension flooding the area around him. He could feel Ka's influence as a warm, tingling sensation, forceful but subtle. The dark being held the others back with his unmatchable psychic will, even the Primarch. Weapons were raised in readiness, but Codian held no doubt that those weapons would not be allowed to fire. This was not a confrontation. The tall being took in his surroundings as he emerged. There was no fear in his manner, nor hostility. Codian could feel the ancient majesty of the warrior. He was clad in a suit of ornate crimson armor that was literally festooned with shimmering green jewels, each one almost identical to the stone that had held the fragmented essence of the Eldar spirit. He wore a vast-horned helm, and draped across one shoulder and fastened to his waist a hide of brilliant green reptile scales. In one hand he carried a mighty axe, its head wreathed in ghostly fire, and in the other a vast, long-barreled weapon of unidentifiable Xenos origin. Like Ka, he knew instinctively that this individual was old, ancient even. Unlike Ka, this newcomer literally exuded a primeval aura of age. He has come. The voice inside his living blade whispered to him, a clear reverence in its soft, ghostly tone. The hero of Harran's Hemesh, the world of blood and tears. He is the one, the shepherd of the Asuria. The dragon, the burning lance. Fuegan. Fuegan. Codian echoed. Though the reaction had been unbidden, he had not thought his voice loud enough to attract the attention of any of the others. When it did, this shocked him, and he found himself taking a step back as the glowing eyes of the ghostly warrior found him. It spoke then, and it did so with a voice both ageless and ghostly, its tone somehow detached. Surreal. Lower your weapons and listen. Those without souls are abroad. They will come to devour you all. Close your eyes and listen for them. You will hear their terrible song. The being was some manner of Eldar, Codian knew that. Whatever it was now he could not explain. But he knew it well nonetheless, for he had seen it in his mind. The Eldar called it Fuegan, and it was a great warrior. He could envisage no gender for the creature, for it was above such distinctions. Whatever it had originally been was long gone. Sex. Age. None of the mortal constraints of existence applied to it. It was only Fuegan, the burning lance. Despite the palpable hostility surrounding it, the entity stepped out into the center of the gathering. Unafraid and proud. It regarded all those around it, and when it spoke, the eternal fires that burned around its ethereal blade flared at its words, as if in empathy. The time of finality is upon us all. Hear the call of war, and heed its cry. We are marked by the hunger of guess. A murmur of unease passed through the gathered soldiers and Astaroutes. Most of those present did not know of the ageless being that stood before them, and even if they had, the situation would not have been any less tense. The towering Primarch looked to Ka, his quicksilver features twisted in a grimace of unabashed displeasure. What is this latest occurrence, alien? What have you brought before us now? This thing reeks of the Eldar. Fuegan. His name is Fuegan. All eyes turned in time to see the female inquisitor pushing her way through the gathered bodies. Her progress took no small effort, but the sheer disbelief writ across her face spoke of a mixture of wonder and determination that no man or Astarte could diminish. The Phoenix Lord of the Fire Dragons. Throne, he is real. He is here. Fuegan regarded her progress with a detached indifference, as one would the passing of an insect. Orekiel slowed as she reached the imposing warrior, her expression hardening in the presence of the burning axe in his hand. Yuthril. You still in there, somewhere? Do you remember me? None present save for Kodian and Shavak knew the truth of Orekiel's former association with the being that had become Fuegan. Orekiel had told Kodian and Shavak of Fuegan once, in the hours following their first meeting. She herself had sought the remains of the Eternal Warrior, and she had succeeded in locating them, only for the Eldar that had accompanied her to take them as his own. Oithril had become Fuegan, and the cycle had begun once more. Do you remember Thelmax? Do you remember anything? Fuegan did not answer. He turned his blazing eyes away from the woman and cast them out across the general throng, pausing slightly only when he found Kodian, and the ancient weapon in his hand. The Surya will come to make war with the stirring legions of the Ingur. Soon this charade will end. And the true face of war will show itself to the masses of life. The dust of the world tombs shifts. Once again. More questions were raised at this, the voices of many of those present rising as one. Kodian started forward, apprehensive of the being yet unafraid. What of the Eldar, Phoenix Lord? He called, pushing through the press. We cannot win this war without them. By this time Fuegan was already in the initial stages of leaving the gathering. Bodies parted before him, fearful of the imposing warrior. He paused as he heard the chaplain's call. When he turned to face Kodian, he did so slowly and with absolute grace. The Eldar will come, prophet, you know that better than any. I see the truth of you, for the strands of fate have woven themselves tight around your soul. Listen always to the voice, Kodian, for it is your guide, your key to understanding all that has passed and all that is to come. You are unique amongst your kind, for the Monkey lead brief and awkward lives. Your kind is too young to hold the Liarabha, the race memory. Fuegan lifted his burning axe up to Kodian's temple. The chaplain blinked, the searing heat of the blade pric cling against his skin. You have been chosen, I see that. The Liarabha is restored within you, and it is strong. I will tell you this then, in the hope that you hold the power to communicate all that must be known to your people. Tell me. Kodian answered. Fuegan shook his head slowly at this. Words cannot breach the boundaries between our races, prophet. Only memories. The glowing runes set into the Phoenix Lord's axe grew brighter at this, writhing as if in agony. Kodian found his gaze drawn to them, as if he could not resist their siren call. Then it came, and he felt it swallow him whole. Darkness. Screaming. Pain and death and nothing but the void. He saw the horrors as they stirred. Vast things of utter evil, inimical to all life. They were coming. The hunger was an ache deep within his soul, an empathic reaction to the depthless appetite of the abominations. He gasped on impulse, his soul numbed by all that he experienced. The Eldar fled before the roiling darkness in their thousands, riding the crest of the living destruction. The image swam like liquid and he found himself fighting to stay on his feet, disorientated by the nauseating shift. Faces flickered past his vision, gray after images that refused to focus no matter how hard he tried to see them clearly. He could feel the hate, palpable and cold, like ice soaking into his bones. Bitter hatred, burning with jealousy. Twisted bodies, ravaged by unending pain. Gray faces, hairless heads and eyes as black as night. He fought to identify these beings, for he could not shake the feeling of recognition from seeing these humanoid creatures in his mind. At first he had thought them to be Tau, but the differences were as obvious as the similarities. What were these twisted, hate-filled creatures? Were they hybrids of some kind, bred from Tau genetic stock? Bred to hate and to wish for the death of all other life. Fragile and sickly, they raged against the very existence that had brought them so callously into being, for their lives were short and filled with pain, and for all their vaunted knowledge, their own cruel mortality was an enemy they could never defeat. No, said a voice in his mind, a collective chorus of every Eldar he had ever met. They were the first. They were the true fathers of the Tau, the ancestor race. They were the Necrontyr. Check the description for the links to the author.